Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Barry Prentice. I am a professor at the Asper School of Business, Supply Chain Management at the University of Manitoba, and also the president of Isopolar. Between the two entities, we are organizing this webinar today. It wasn't a plan to have a webinar right now. In fact, we were going to meet in person. That was going to be in Montreal on these very same dates. But as things happened with the Ukraine invasion and still some questions about the pandemic, it was decided that we would postpone the in-person conference to October 20th, 21st, which we are going to do. And instead, we would have a webinar at this time, since a lot of people had been anticipating this conference, which in fact itself had been delayed 2 years. The pandemic has taken a great toll on our plans. In any case, we do welcome you all here, and thank you for attending. This webinar is also a sort of celebration. It was 20 years ago this year that the University of Manitoba held the very first Airships to the Arctic Conference. This was an effort to try and bring the attention to the airships as a solution to climate change in the north. At that time, there were still lots of skeptics. No one really was certain, was climate change really happening? Was it not happening? But we could see at that time already that the winter roads were already losing a lot of their season. Climate change was having some impact. And we looked to the future to say, well, what are we going to do when the winter roads are not going to operate? And of course, the answer we had was to have the airships as a solution to that. So that's where we started out. Over time, we've had a number of conferences, and of course, the interest in airships has grown greatly. It's increased substantially because of climate change and the ability of the airships to, first of all, not consume much fuel because the lift is free, but now we're seeing the airship industry moving to electric propulsion with hydrogen as the source of fuel, and as a result, zero carbon emissions. So there's a lot of positivity about airships, not just to serve the north, but also as a solution to climate change itself, and perhaps to replace some of the other means of transport like cargo jets, which of course are quite polluting. We do welcome you also as part of Isopolar. This is a non-for-profit entity that was set up to encourage airships. The membership is free, and please take advantage of that if you have an opportunity. At this point, I'd like to introduce Nathan Smith. Nathan has worked with me on some of the blogs you'll see on the Isopolar website, one of our hardworking committee members. And without further ado, Nathan, I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. I'm Nathan Smith. I'm a PhD economist. I used to teach in university. Now I do some sort of technology policy consulting, mostly in telecommunications, but I have a longstanding interest in airships. I worked for an airship startup back in 2007. We had some dreams of building some giant airships, and I was the head of market research there. So I've been thinking a lot about the demand side, which is the focus of the session this morning. And I'm trying to establish myself as a bit of a promoter, so I post a lot on LinkedIn. So if you think this is interesting, then just definitely feel free to jump on and follow me in LinkedIn. So a few things about the session. The Q&A is where I'll be looking for questions to ask to the panelists. We would love to see people using the chat a lot, but we think of it as kind of as a thought bank that we can circle back to after the conference to see what impressions people have had, what questions have arisen, and so forth. But if you want a question to be asked to the panelists, put it in the Q&A. We'll start with Katrina Nokleby, and just so that you can know a little bit about her. Katrina Nokleby is the member of the Legislative Assembly for the District of Great Slave in Yellowknife. Elected in 2019, Katrina sits on the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. And she attended the recent climate change conference in Glasgow as a guest of the Great Northwest Territories Department of Energy and Natural Resources. Before entering politics, Katrina worked as a consulting engineer in the North with 13 years of field and project management experience in the environmental, geological, and ice engineering fields. And during that time, she volunteered with and served as a counselor for NAPEG. She also serves as deputy chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. And one of her main reasons for entering the political arena was to bring an engineering perspective to the world of government and leadership. So I'm very eager to hear what she has to say about airships and the North.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I like to consider myself a Jill of all trades and master of none. So I'm not going to come here, I think, today and tell you much about what I know about airships, which is very little, actually. I did do a statement in the House last session about it in preparation for this. So what I am going to talk about today is the issues facing the Northwest Territories and sort of our problems that perhaps the airships could be a good solution for. And I'm hoping that maybe you can share that back with me, whether or not I should be pushing this in the legislature for my colleagues. So I'm just going to figure out here how to share my screen. All right. So while my presentation is titled Problems and Solution of Disappearing Ice, I'm really not going to talk a lot about ice per se. I'm going to talk more about generally the climate change impacts that we are seeing in the Northwest Territories and perhaps the issues that you can help us with. So as you can see, I am a professional engineer. I am non-practicing. I worked very hard for that designation, so I continue to use it throughout my time as a politician. Being in politics has been very interesting. So if anybody would like to follow up on that conversation at a later date, feel free to hit me up on social media or through my email at the end of the presentation. So I just wanted to start by giving everyone a background about our winter road network in the Northwest Territories. If you're not familiar with winter roads or ice roads, they are seasonal roads that are built every year in order to connect some of our communities. And this is a map of the Beaufort Delta area, which is on the northern coast of the Northwest Territories bordering the Yukon. As you can see there, and I'm sorry for cutting off the legend, just I wanted to make it large enough here, but anything that's in purple dash line is an ice road or a winter road. So that community there of Aklavik is serviced by an ice road in the winter time. Otherwise, it's a fly-in only community. If you look, we also used to have Tuk on the northern coast. It used to be an ice road only community as well. However, recently we built the Inuvik to Tuk Highway, which was quite an engineering feat from a permafrost perspective. And I encourage you to Google that if you'd like to hear more information about it. Notably, we have 3 communities off to the side there on the eastern part of the map, and those are all fly-in only communities. So as you can see, we're heavily reliant on ice and on airplanes to fuel our communities, and ships to get supplies in, etc. So as the climate continues to change, we're really seeing a huge impact on our transportation system. I'm just going to move to the next slide here, which is the central and southern portions of the NWT. Here you can see that we have a lot more ice roads servicing our communities. The ones that are sort of highlighted over in red are ones that we're currently discussing as permanent infrastructure. The one on the western part of the map is the Mackenzie Valley Highway. So as you can see, there's 5 communities there that are all only serviced by ice roads in the winter. Otherwise, everything is flown in. So you can imagine the cost of doing everything there. We also have a bunch of communities there on the eastern part of the territory that are also only serviced by an ice road. We just recently built the permanent road to Wati there. So we are starting to move forward. That was a P3 partnership in order to have an all-season road that will service those communities and extend the life of the ice road when it is built. As you can see, though, we have a very lack of permanent infrastructure. Most of our roads are gravel that we do have. This leads to a lot of maintenance and upkeep costs, as well as a lot of damage to my truck, as I like to drive around a bunch and see different places. So as I was saying, we're experiencing unprecedented climate change in the north at a much greater rate than other places in the world. We have increased precipitation and extreme weather events, which has recently led to extreme flooding in our rivers and lakes, particularly over the last 2 years, and most recently in the South Slave in this past month. And I'm going to show you some footage of that in a minute here. We have a huge amount of coastal erosion up on the Arctic Ocean, particularly in Tuktoyaktuk. We also see permafrost degradation across the territory, which is having a few impacts on us. Clearly, we have slumping, so that's impacting our few roads, such as the Dempster Highway and others. We also have a threat to our infrastructure, buildings, etc. And then the cost to accommodate now and design for melting and changing permafrost, unstable permafrost, discontinuous permafrost, is becoming more prohibitive as time goes on, and really is taxing the capacity, I think, of our resources in the north. So I just wanted to share this footage here that was taken, as you can see, in May, and just this month, so probably about 2 weeks ago now. This is the community of Hay River on the South Slave. It's on the south shore of Great Slave Lake, and obviously, as it's titled, it sits on the Hay River. And this year, the Hay River flooded in a manner that has never been seen before. So what you're seeing here as I animate this, and I hope it's coming across, is on the right is the ice-jammed river. So the Hay River, and then on the left is what was our burgeoning agriculture sector being flooded out. So you can see the greenhouses, you can see shop buildings on the left. You can see, I think that was a crop area there on the left that we just passed. This is only a small portion of the area that is flooded. The entire town itself is flooded, and this is an area that has not shown historic flooding in the past. So not only are we seeing flooding in areas that we typically expect, and most of our communities are built on floodplains, we are also now finding it in places that we've never seen it before. And we have to ask, has this been an issue with some of the work upstream with the Site C Dam? There's been a lack of dredging in the channels of the river for the last so many years after the federal government stopped paying for it. We had devolution about 6 years ago now, 7 years ago now, 6. And that has really caused the territory to have to take on a lot of things themselves. And as a result, I think this is what we're seeing. I think I'll just move on from that. I suggest this is from a fellow named Aaron Tamber. If you'd like, he took tons of footage during this flooding, and it was apocalyptic. I mean, it wasn't flooding in the summer, it was flooding while the snow was coming down in the middle of the night. And there's going to be a lot of, I think, residual trauma left over from this. So moving on to the next example of our issues here in the territory is the Tuktoyaktuk coastal erosion. So the map on the right, which I took from Andrzejczyk and Smith, shows the difference in the coastline on the community of the hamlet of Tuk from 1950 versus 2002. So this is already 20 years out of date. So you can imagine this tiny spit of land is already probably impacted quite a bit more. So the erosion rate in the hamlet is 1 meter per year, which is just remarkable when you consider how slow some geological processes go. Tuk Island, which is the little portion you can kind of see in the northeast of the map, actually is eroding at a greater rate, so double at 2 meters per year, and is expected to be completely gone by 2050. It is currently protecting a good portion of the hamlet itself. So once that happens, it will speed up the loss of the community. The current estimate of just finding a quick fix solution to stop it for now was $42 million before the pandemic. So at this point, it's unknown what it would cost. And then for a permanent fix, I imagine we're into hundreds of millions, if not more, in costs. This one is a video that I did get from a fellow at the Geological Survey here in the Northwest Territories. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It does have his voiceover, and it is quite impactful. And it just talks a little bit about permafrost slumping and how rapidly it can all change here as we go. So I'm just going to let that play for a few minutes here so you can see the video, and then I'll move past it because I'm conscious of time.
In July 2015, a small lake in the Peel Plateau region of Canada's Northwest Territories drained because a large permafrost thaw slump eroded its shoreline. A small pond remains in the drained lake basin, and a cavity visible in the foreground developed when the lake poured its waters into the expanding thaw slump over a period of less than a few hours. This thaw slump has grown over time as ice-rich permafrost underlying the landscape.
Oh, my apologies. I'm trying to look at the chat while that's going on. So anyway, I won't continue on with this because I am conscious of time, but that someone did ask, what is a slump? So this is exactly what a slump is. And one of the issues with permafrost and thaw-sensitive soils is that once you cut into them, the degradation and the geomorphologic process becomes very accelerated. So what's happened here and what Dr. Coquel talks about is that once this lake drained and the debris flow occurred down the valley, it ended up blocking another small river or small creek. And with the backup of that creek, what ended up happening was creating additional thawing and slumping from the creek as the water ponded at the base of the slope. So this is a concern for any type of construction that we do in the Northwest Territories, and why I had mentioned the Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway earlier. It's an entirely fill highway constructed on top of the tundra in order to prevent any sort of permafrost degradation. Unfortunately, there was budget issues, and the fill that was placed was cut down, and now we are seeing degradation of the highway and ponding with water, which is creating geotechnical issues for the highway and more costs to us as a government. So moving on, the next issue, no, I don't want to play that again. So let's see if it, there we go. Another major issue that maybe people wouldn't think about when they think of the Northwest Territories is our unsettled land claims, and how those really do affect us when it comes to transportation and our infrastructure, is that we're unable to relocate our communities out of the floodplains or climate sensitive areas, because the surrounding land is often tied up in the land claim process. So for example, Jean Marie River, which flooded out very terribly last year, and I went to visit this year, and luckily the flooding broke, or the rivers broke well this year in favor of them, and they didn't flood out. But when I asked why they're literally on the floodplain, as a geotechnical engineer, I was aghast to see this community settled here, situated here. And they told me they can't move because all the surrounding land is part of the withdrawal of the land claim. And therefore, even though it will become their land and the band's land at one point, the only option for them at this point is a land transfer. So that would then mean Crown land in the middle of their community. So, which is not useful to them either. So it's created a lot of issues there. It also creates issues around our economy, because we have all this land and we're unable to access much of it for development or mineral resource extraction, which is our driver of our economy. With our diamond mines sunsetting soon, we are facing an economic outbreak, or a future that looks quite bleak, as I mentioned in the next line there. So we even have less money for infrastructure, and we're already in quite a deficit, as you can see from just the roads perspective, but we also have a lot of other deficits in infrastructure. And what this also does, it creates an atmosphere of over consultation and engagement. So it creates a burnout almost with Indigenous governments and organizations, as they constantly try to react and input on all of the information that the government presents to them over time. And really it becomes challenging then in order to move anything forward, including climate adaptation and mitigation. So, rightfully so, I have nothing but support for the Indigenous governments in their negotiations with the Crown. Moving on, we have other issues that affect the NWT, and one I mentioned was our infrastructure deficit is our power. Currently, we pay 31 cents a kilowatt hour here in Yellowknife for power. I believe in BC you might be paying 6. So as you can imagine, our power bills are astronomical. This leads to a lot of lack of investment in the Northwest Territories. We need to expand our Tallston hydroelectricity dam in the South Slave. It is near Hay River there, Pine Point. But the cost of that project is greater than $1 billion, and needs to have mines as consumers set up prior to its expansion, and for us to get the money to be committed. As I mentioned, the reason that this is so important is that 20 of our communities of the 33 in the territory are thermal communities. And so that means that they're reliant on diesel or fuel for their power and heating. This not only has a cost ramification, as we have no pipelines in the territory, so we bring all of that fuel in by truck or barge, but it has a huge economic cost in that we're burning fuel. There has been progress made on high energy and efficiency batteries storage packs, so the diesel can be turned off. But one of the sort of the conundrums is that no matter what we do, we'll always have to have diesel backup in high Arctic communities in the event that the power goes out during the winter. Another major issue for us in the territory is our food insecurity, and it's the fragility of that was really heightened during the pandemic. If you Google me, I used to be a minister. That's another whole story for a different day, but I was the minister responsible for basically all of the supply chain during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And it was shocking to me when I sat on my federal, provincial, territorial tables about how reliant Canada was on the south of Mexico and the US for our food supply, temporary foreign workers to pick our own crops, and then throw us on at the end of the line up in the Northwest Territories, where, you know, if these small airplane charter companies go out of business, communities become stranded. So it really sort of impressed upon me how interconnected everything is in the Northwest Territories. So, you know, one area with airships, you know, could be that it could help us with some of our food security issues. As I mentioned, the global supply chain was a real concern during the pandemic and is only increasingly concerning afterwards. The cost of construction materials is skyrocketing. So is the demand for all of that. That then again allows us, creates a problem for us trying to build infrastructure. Our federal capital money rarely comes with operations and maintenance funding. We always have to come up with that money on our own. And generally our funding formula is a 75-25% split, which means the GNWT must put up the 25% dollars for any infrastructure project. So you can imagine 25% of over $1 billion for a much needed hydroelectric expansion is very cost prohibitive to a territory that's barely able to graduate people at, you know, greater than a 57% rate. So, you know, and it's very hard for me as a scientific background person who sees that the lack of infrastructure is impacting social issues to press for roads when people need houses and other such things. But I always say, how much is your house going to cost when you have to fly all those materials in if we don't do something about our infrastructure deficit? And then our fiscal outlook is grim. We're at the limit for our borrowing. I think we're at $1.9 billion. So we've been downgraded in our bond ratings. So economically, the territory is not looking wonderful. So that's creating some problems as well. I do see, so question in the chat was, do I see the future for small modular reactors for hydro in the north? So you're talking of nuclear reactors or small hydro, sorry. I'm just looking to see who asked me that. Oh, I don't. So anyway, I do see a need for nuclear, the small batteries, but you can't say the word nuclear in the Northwest Territories without creating a huge amount of controversy. Yeah, nuclear. So yeah, so while I do think that actually it is a solution for the territory, especially when, you know, if it is such a small unit as a you know, CCAN type size, and there is any issue, it can be contained. However, it is really a hot button topic here. And we had someone come speak at our NAPEG conference and he got like booed out of town at a public venue. So, you know, concerning. The geothermal question for the thermal communities is an interesting one. We don't have a lot of high groundwater recharge in the territory, so that creates a bit of an issue because it's my understanding for thermal, a lot of it is the movement of the water and the extraction of the heat from the water. It has been looked at, and we do have a geothermal anomaly in the Decho, so the southwestern portion of the territory, but really hasn't been explored. Again, lack of capacity, lack of resources. To me, I think the solution there is to partner with universities in order to have them fund some of that research. And we do have great permafrost and soil science partnerships happening with Waterloo, sorry. Oh, it's going to escape me, Laurier University and others that are here doing work in the territory. So I do think that that is something we're going to have to continue to push for if we want to have any sort of research being done on this. And then I just wanted to add that we have one of the highest rates of social issues in the Northwest Territories: addictions, mental health issues, suicide, domestic violence, and sexual assault. So while this is a conference on climate change and ice roads and disappearing ice, it does play into this conversation. One of the issues around even opening up a road is, you know, the access that brings to small communities, drug dealers, you know, people coming in and taking advantage of vulnerable people, things like that. So even just something as simple as building a road can have quite a controversial discussion around it. So another way that I see that airships may be a way to go as far as supply issues without having to build that infrastructure. So this slide I threw together at the end because I really am new to airships, and you know, I hope or wish that I had more time to participate in the conference so I could learn more about whether they would work for us. But these are what I sort of see as the pros and cons at the moment. Was the less infrastructure intensive. We have a major airport expansion happening up in Inuvik, which has permafrost, ice-rich soils, which is already proving to be difficult to come up with a design for. So that could potentially be a solution there. It does minimize the disturbances to thaw sensitive permafrost soils if you don't have to build permanent infrastructure. We have a lot of remote contaminated sites that continue to need to be cleaned up, as well as exploration projects that currently use small aircraft. Definitely airships could be a way for them to be helped in that. And as I said, it reduces the needs for the roads and the associated costs. I guess my questions to you as a conference would be, is the cold weather tested and proven? Is the technology going to work for us when it is -40 out and the wind is blowing, when the power source may not be so steady as we move into electric options? So that's always a neat reason. And I'll get a plug in that the Northwest Territories is open for cold weather testing as well. It is a business and economic arm that we are looking at. And we have recently had the Korean military come and test an airplane. We've had Porsche come in the past. So, it is a great place to come and experience the North and test your cold weather vehicles if you're interested. As I said, I'm not certain what kinds of costs or infrastructure would be needed in order to support airships. Obviously, if we move to electric ones, there'd be charging stations, et cetera, that would be required. So that would be something I'd be interested in. And further, I think that residents would still want to have roads in the sense of they want to communicate with or be able to travel. And I never heard so much excitement as when that road to Inuvik opened from Tuck, and basketball teams were able to come down on a bus and play each other. So so that actually is the end of my formal part of my presentation. I see there's a question there. So I've got my contact there up. Would the construction of an airship hangar depot in the NWT be considered under infrastructure or transportation, and how can? So we only have a Department of Infrastructure. So that does make it kind of nice. They combined Public Works and DOT into infrastructure. So it would just be under one department. We are currently actually doing an airport upgrade or starting the works to upgrade the Yellowknife Airport. So, if it were something that is feasible here, why could we not incorporate an airship sector or section of that airport as we do the expansion? So I'd be very happy to put some people in touch with the right people here. An eco-energy option for Northern Canada. So I appreciate that link I think someone put in. I don't see it as being active, but I can, oh, here we go. So I will look at that after the conference. And so I should sort of explain here that my role is a regular member, and we are a consensus style government. We don't have a party system. So I'm one person of the opposition, so to speak, to then push my government to do things. So I kind of waved my hand when someone said, oh, are we part of the government or not? We kind of are. We wear all of the things that the government does, but really all my avenue is to press and push my colleagues to look at new things and then vote out their budgets if they don't listen to me. So it is quite an interesting process. As an engineer coming into politics, our skill set is a little different, and people don't really like to hear things super bluntly sometimes. So I think that's been my learning curve. So I'm going to probably just leave it there and just see if there's any other further questions or comments. I'm not even sure where I'm at for time. So
Katrina, thanks. Yeah, that was fascinating, and I like that you've clearly put some thought already into the effects that cargo airships could have on the logistics, specifically of Northwest Territories. And yeah, I think they could potentially reduce carbon emissions and help with some of the climate change in general, reducing climate change, but that's pretty slight, and there's probably not a lot that you could do to bring that about. But on the side of, say, something like food insecurity, making it easier to supply communities during the winter months, that definitely is something that that airships would be able to help with. As far as infrastructure needs, I think it's mostly it will depend a lot on the design. So if it's a hybrid, it might need a short runway. If it's pure lighter than air airship, it might need a mast. So that's a complicated conversation. But in general, there's a good reason to think that cargo airships would need less infrastructure investment than certainly than a road to a remote location or than an airport. So that's part of the promise of airships. So yeah, well, let me see. You've already answered most of the questions that came in during your presentation. So we may get more, and we'll see if we have some time at the end for more questions. But I'll go ahead and move on to our next presenter.
Can I
If
just
that's
jump
all
in?
right. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to close out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if anybody does want to follow up on anything further that I've said, feel free to send me an email. I'm used to being an 18-hour-a-day consultant, so I find and then a minister that was crazy during COVID. So I find that I do have time and don't mind educating on the North. The other pieces I do have to leave. We are in session today, so I'm not going to be able to stick around till the end of this discussion, but I'll try to stay on as long as I can. So,
well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for yeah, certainly, yeah, reach out to me. I'd love to correspond more and talk about the demand side, capabilities and so forth. Yeah, well, thank you, and I guess we'll move on next to Norm Normand. Norm Normand was born in Edmonton, joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2004 as an infantry officer, and after finishing his undergraduate studies and then going on to get a diploma in logistics management at the University of Alberta, he eventually transferred to the Royal Canadian Navy to see some new places. Since joining the Navy, Norm is deployed to South America, Asia, and Europe to coordinate and provide logistical support to operations in those regions. In 2013, he completed the Ammunition Technical Officer course in the UK and also an MBA from the University of Liverpool, specializing in international business. He's also been the Chief Procurement Officer at the Canadian Forces Base in Halifax, Commanding Officer at the Canadian Forces Ammunition Depot in Rocky Point, and completed his Master of Defense Studies, where he wrote a dissertation about airships, providing some support for Canada's Arctic, and that's the source of his interest in airships, which we'll be hearing more about today. So, go ahead, Norm.
All right. Just can I get positive confirmation that everybody can see my screen? My setup here doesn't allow much. This, yes. Can you see my sharing screen? Just
I can see it.
Perfect. All right. Well, if you can, it's for you. If everybody else can, it's for them too. Okay. Thanks very much for the intro. That's right. My name is Norm Normand because my parents are funny. My presentation today is on sovereignty and northern supply. In the top right corner there, you can see a picture of a Coast Guard vessel at the fuel facility in Nanisivik. That's on the coast of Baffin Island. Both the Coast Guard and the Navy use that facility for logistical resupply. In the bottom picture there, you've got a barge on the Mackenzie River, which we've discussed today in Katrina's presentation. That's actually during the summer months, a line of communication that cargo gets transferred up and down from the communities in Slave Lake all the way up to Tuktoyaktuk and along the Arctic coast. So just a lot of people don't understand that is an actual legitimate line of communication that's used in the north for northern supply. And we're going to talk about that and a lot of other things in a sec. So without further ado, I'll advance the slide. He said, here we go. Okay, so who's this guy? Thanks for the intro. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm a Navy logistician. I also have a specialty in ammo. I've deployed all over the place. I've got 18 years of service, and I found out about airships because of a Master's of Defense study degree I did. They were looking for a solution set to the problem of sustainment in the Arctic. And after finding out about this whole airship thing, I started my own consulting business because I really do believe this is going to be the future for Canada. And there's just stuff I can do as a private citizen that I'm not able to do as a military person. So having that flexibility enables me to advance this accordingly. I've also been to some schools. I got an MBA, Master of Defense Studies, like I said, and Bachelor of Arts and all that great stuff. So we don't need to belabor that. Okay, I'm sure we've seen this quote before. If some countries have too much history, we have too much geography, from William Lyon Mackenzie King. I mean, what is that? What we're talking about here really is the 30% of Canada's landmass that is accessible via low-cost conventional modes of transportation, meaning the remaining 70% is difficult to access because of climate and weather. I don't have to educate anybody here in this forum, I don't think, on that aspect of it. The 90% of Canadians that live within 160 kilometers of the US border basically means that the majority of the population and the transportation infrastructure that services that population is clustered in the southernmost region of the country. So why am I, as a naval logistician, interested in this? Well, national defense is a public good. The Canadian Armed Forces, sometimes I'll call it the CAF, C-A-F. We love our acronyms in the military. Well, we're mandated to perform national defense on behalf of the government of Canada. National defense is not limited to the southernmost regions, despite that's where the clusters of population and transportation infrastructure are. So because we're tasked with defending the entirety of the nation, a solution is required so we're able to conduct operations in the entirety of the nation efficiently and in a manner that's sensitive to local demands. So that's why I'm interested. We'll move on to the next slide here. So where does that leave us? Well, in 1914, we're going to be doing a little bit of a history lesson here. Map maker John Bartholomew produced an isochronous map that illustrates the length of time it takes to travel from London to various destinations around the world. From this map, we can see that in 1914, it took over 40 days to access Canada's Arctic from London. So I'll just highlight the little blue box there is the legend. So you see in red, you've got 5 days, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and over 40 in the darkest blue right here. So let's flash forward about a century. In 2016, Rome to Rio produced an updated map. And even after over that century, the high Arctic remains one of the least accessible locations. Many of the islands in the high Arctic are not covered by Rome to Rio's 2016 map even. We can and we must do better. That's the bottom line. Okay, so what do we have to work with in Canada's North? Like I said, that little, I'll brief this map sort of generally from west to east. So that big blue oval on both maps there is that Mackenzie River line of communication I was talking about between Tuktoyaktuk and the communities in Greater Slave Lake, Hay River being one of them there, identified on the map. There's a floating dry dock in Tuktoyaktuk for emergency repairs, just giving you familiarity for the infrastructure that we have to work with here. This line of communication is not really open for longer than the summer, although with exacerbating climate change, potentially that window will get wider. But yeah, that's basically the situation in that region from a logistician's perspective. Moving now east, Churchill, Manitoba currently does not have a road, as you can see from the map on the right. However, it is serviced by rail. It does have a seaport and a regional airport with access to Winnipeg. Plans are underway for a road to connect the region, which would establish redundancy along that existing rail line of communication that connects Churchill via ground. And then continuing to move east, Moosonee. It's not connected to Canada's transportation network by road, much like Churchill. However, there is a rail line of communication to Moosonee and a regional airport. Its relative proximity to Ontario and Quebec, to Southern Ontario and Quebec specifically, position it as a really prime candidate for a node in Eastern Canada. And I'll get into what I mean by node in a little bit. Then continuing east, CFB Goose Bay and Labrador City. I just want to talk briefly about those. Goose Bay is an Canadian Air Force base. It can handle a variety of aircraft, C-17s included. It makes it a candidate also for a node. However, airships can be big. Airspace can be constrained. So maybe that's not the best option for a node for pushing a bunch of cargo up. Maybe the better option is Labrador City, which does have rail linkages via the Quebec North Shore Labrador Railway, QNSNL. So yeah, that's sort of the situation out Labrador way. Another key location in the Arctic is Nanisivik. We saw that on the first slide I put up there. That's the fuel facility on Baffin Island. It's identified there on the map. And basically, the concept here is that the Navy and the Canadian government will push fuel and resources up there so that when the Navy and the Coast Guard are conducting operations in that region, they have somewhere to refuel. Basically, the concept is to have it sparsely crewed, but there will inevitably be consumable items used for maintenance and repair that will periodically need to be shipped up to Nanisivik. So it will have to require some sustainment of its own, which brings us to Iqaluit as another option for providing that sustainment. So there could be a very interesting relationship between Iqaluit and this Nanisivik vis-a-vis sustainment. Get into that in a moment. Okay, so this is what I proposed for a circuit, basically to connect the entire Arctic region. Airships would transit this circuit, and each of those nodes indicated with green and blue stars would act as sort of a hub and spoke concept. So cargo could be pushed up to those locations. The green stars indicate by ground, air. The blue stars indicate only by air or sea. But basically you could pre-situate the cargo you needed until such time as one of the airships made its way along this route to collect that cargo and deliver it to wherever it needs to go in the region. Yeah, okay, let's just here. Okay, and then I'll go into the map on the right. The area inside the green arc reflects a distance an airship with a 150 km/h cruising speed could travel in a 12-hour period in any direction away from a potential node in Hay River. Wasn't aware of the flooding going on there, but I still think it's a good candidate for a node. That was remarkable footage that we saw in the last presentation. As we can see from this map, though, only one airship delivering cargo, as described, would necessitate a redrawing of that 2016 isochronic map. It would make all of the Canadian Arctic accessible for cargo movement inside 24 hours. So it is possible to do better. Okay, so increasing the number of airships to 2, if we add another one sort of based out of Moosonee and a third, say, in Iqaluit, it'll increase the response time accordingly. So you've got on the left the proposed circuit with 2 airships, one in Moosonee, one in Hay River. On the right, 3, one based out of Iqaluit as well. Basically, in these scenarios, we're able to push cargo into the Arctic in a before unseen level of a timeline, which is what I think is why it's the way ahead. Conventional. So hang on a sec. Sorry, I gotta get back here. Okay, yeah, there's another aspect to this too. So one of the limitations of conventional air power is they have to spend a much greater percentage of the time on the ground than in the air. Airships represent a great hybrid of air and sea power, actually, because yes, we're subject to severe weather in the airship space, but and yes, they need to be refueled and maintained, but they can spend upwards of 300 days operational in the sky. That's significantly not the case in with conventional aircraft. It's this persistence in the air domain, basically, that presents an opportunity for cargo movements. With cargo, you can effectively have an airship loitering in the area, and it can be deployed within 12 to 24 hours to wherever it's required. So this is where I propose a circuit that would enable cargo delivery to any kind of scenario that the military could come up with, to anywhere in the Arctic within a relatively short period of time. Military exercises and operations in the region, you may have heard of one, it's called Op-Nanook. Basically, that's where we simulate a aircraft that has crashed in the Arctic region, and we test ourselves at our ability to respond to that crash. We have a lot of lessons learned that come out of that, and a lot of lessons learned focus on how inaccessible the region is. This makes that not a problem anymore. So I'm really hoping that the military does look at this seriously, because I think there's a lot of scope for us to do our jobs a lot more effectively with some airship solutions at work. Okay, yeah, we'll leave it there for now. So let's go on to the next. I think I belabored that point enough. Let's talk a little bit about sovereignty now. So sovereignty issues. First, I'd like to draw your attention to a little stretch of water called the Nares Strait. It's between Ellesmere Island and Greenland. I've proposed that this could reconfigure the Arctic shipping routes through our waters over the next, well, up 20, 30 years as the sea ice becomes continually melted throughout the Arctic Ocean. So this Nares Strait connector is something I just want to highlight because it's going to become important, I think, going forward. There have been very low levels of reported passages over the Nares Strait since the region was first subject to exploration. But it has been noted that it would be by people smarter than me, who are academics and have more degrees behind their name than me, that it could be a feeder to the Trans-Sea route, or Transpolar Sea Route, the TSR, and the Northwest Passage. This would help improve shipping times and sending cargo through the area with a lot greater alacrity. Okay, now Denmark's not traditionally associated with being an adversary or a competitive nation with us. There have been the Hans Island thing, I think people are aware of. That is in the Nares Strait. But there's also there's a dispute regarding the Lomonosov Ridge. This is the Canadian government basically claims that it's an extension of the Ellesmere Island, so that's the area circled in red. Denmark claims that the ridge is an extension of Greenland. So that's where, if you've heard of the Lomonosov Ridge, you may have heard of that dispute as well. And why do we care about all this? I mean, the reason is all about, if we are able to regulate traffic, the concept is, if we're able to regulate traffic, if we're able to apply Canadian laws in some fashion in the region, then we're exercising sovereignty in the region, which is currently, we're not doing it, or we are, but we're competing with the Danes. So if we keep that concept in our head, the Canadian government exercises sovereignty by regulating whatever government laws that have been produced in Canada in a region. If we're able to do that, then we're expressing sovereignty in that region. Just to bear that in mind. That's why we're so picky and hung up on little patches of water that the shipping traffic needs to go through. So neither Canada nor Denmark has sought to deny the right of innocent passage through the Nares Strait yet. However, innocent passage is one of those things that a country can exercise sovereignty by denying or revoking or temporarily suspending for the sake of espionage. Now we're going to get into a little bit of a secret squirrel talk here, but that's okay. I'll keep it light. But yeah, basically since 1950, it's been common for Chinese, British, North Korean, American, Soviet, now Russian submarines to be used for undersea spying with regularity. So in intrusions into territorial waters of other sovereign states, that's not uncommon with this type of espionage activity. Well, for Canadian sovereignty to be expressed over this region, we need to be able to first detect that there is a submarine there and tell them, hey, go away. We don't want you here. What are you doing here? So we have those capabilities, but we don't have the capability yet to project that as efficiently as we probably could. So yeah, this is where sovereignty comes into play big time, is when it comes to other state or non-state actors being able to access patches of Canadian territory to do whatever they want with, and for us to not know about it and not be able to regulate it means that it questions if it's even really ours. So anyway, that's the Denmark issue with the Nares Strait. I will note here that the Lomonosov Ridge also and the Menendeleev Rise were claimed by Russia as they claim that is their continental sea shelf. So people talk about Russian claiming the North Pole, but their claim actually stops at the North Pole. So the Lomonosov Ridge right now there's no claims that Russia's making that overlaps with our own claims. That being said, Russia sometimes does different things that we're not expecting. That's all I'm going to say on that. Okay, the next slide here. So the Northwest Passage is another sovereignty issue. We kind of danced around it, but now we're going to talk about it head on. It's another point of contention between Canada and the US, and arguably the world. The US, along with most other maritime countries, acknowledges that Canada owns the Northwest Passage, but there's still a dispute over whether the Northwest Passage is Canadian internal waters or an international strait. If it's Canadian internal waters, we can regulate it according to our own laws and regulations. If it's not, we have to go with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS for short. So unfortunately, unfortunately, a negotiated resolution, put it this way, a negotiated resolution is much more likely to come down that favors Canada's claim if Canada can establish a history or a pattern of exercising governmental functions in the region. The existence of our Canadian stricter than UNCLOS environmental regulations, it helps position us to apply those regulations because of Canadian standards and exert sovereignty over that critical piece of transportation. It's not infrastructure, but it's a line of communication, that critical line of communication. So there's a surveillance. Okay, so let's back up a bit more. So if we're able to regulate or enforce Canadian laws over the region, we're able to exert sovereignty. There's an opportunity for other government departments such as Transport Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, the RCMP, CBSA, to utilize all that information that airships could be gathering as they're transiting that circuit to potentially levy fines or say, hey, you're being non-compliant with shipping regulation XYZ. Here's a fine, whatever. Oh, hey, by the way, as you make your way past this port, we're going to be impounding your vessel because we need to search it because we saw something, right? So that the bottom line is detection of and punishment for non-compliance with Canadian environmental and transportation regulations that are more stringent with UNCLOS meets the definition of exercising sovereignty. By using airships to detect non-compliance, would be effectively exercising sovereignty over the Northwest Passage, regardless of any ongoing dispute over if it's an internal to Canada water or not. If we start regulating it, the dispute can go on forever. That's great, fine. But we've established a history of sovereignty over that particular region, and that's what we need to start doing. Okay. another interesting sovereignty angle that we can take on this is emerged from the hamlet in Nunavut called Qikiqtarjuaq, and I hope I got that pronunciation right. I'm going to practice a few times throughout the presentation, so if somebody from who speaks Inuktitut can correct go right ahead. I'm happy to take that correction. Anyway, Section 35 of the Constitution Act establishes constitutional protection to Indigenous people's rights, and Canada's Supreme Court has confirmed that Indigenous people hold title to their lands based on their occupation and governance. The courts have specifically affirmed that the Inuit hold Indigenous title to their territories in Canada. In this case, we see some overlapping sovereignty over the Arctic region. I mean, in theory, if the interests of the Indigenous peoples inhabiting their lands are aligned with the Canadian government's interests, friction between those two stakeholder groups, that there's not going to occur. Unfortunately, these interests are not always aligned. An example of this could translate into a threat to Canadian sovereignty, and that's what we see in the hamlet of Qikiqtarjuaq. Okay, it's the location of Qikiqtarjuaq along the Northwest Passage and potentially along the the Nares Strait connector, with relative close proximity to the Arctic bridge route. It makes it a very strategically compelling location with respect to Canadian and Inuit sovereignty. It's got a small population, only about 500 people, and it's situated right at the entrance to the Northwest Passage. It has a good protected harbor, it has good anchorage, and it has a moderate tidal range. So not only does it have geography in its favor, there's also valuable fishing grounds in the area. At the moment, most fishing vessels in the region transit across the Davis Strait / Baffin Bay, which is a stretch of open Arctic water, to Greenland to offload fish, refuel, and conduct crew changes. A deep water port that was situated in Qikiqtarjuaq could feasibly support a processing plant near the fishing grounds, open opportunities for selling shrimp locally, and create more jobs like net making and welding. If a fish processing capability was established in Qikiqtarjuaq, an entire Canadian fishery would have essentially vertically integrated a portion of its supply chain because of the shortened transit time associated with the airship circuit, talking 12 hours, 24 hours. It'd be possible to leverage that to ship perishable commodities like fish or seafood to national or international markets, thus streamlining the supply chain even further. So, what does this have to do with sovereignty? Well, the Hamlet's Director of Finance, Arthur Nicomedes, acknowledged that both the federal government and the government of Nunavut have already helped, but this help is insufficient in actually executing the construction of the port facility, which has an estimated price tag of $50 million. As we saw in the previous presentation, nothing up there is cheap. Nicomedes stated that while some foreign investors have already come forward, the Hamlet is extending an invitation to quote unquote wealthy Chinese businessmen. Like as a military person, that makes my blood run cold. Like what are we doing now? So we have to rely on maybe foreign investors who we don't know what their motivations are to deliver like economic prosperity to a region in our own country. Like, that doesn't sit well from a national defense perspective. Is that part of the Arctic really Canada anymore then? We can start asking those questions and not having comfortable answers to them. Okay, so what do we need to do? A stakeholder approach is absolutely required. What do I mean by that? Well, what I proposed here with my circuit and all that, that's an idea from a white guy from Edmonton who joined the Navy, who came up with this while examining the environment through military issue lenses. So mine is certainly not the only voice. And if all I've done is to create a straw man that gets reconfigured but starts a discussion that ends with a better quality of life for the inhabitants of Canada's Arctic, I'm going to go ahead and call that a win. So that's where it becomes difficult. And I was really glad that Katrina mentioned on the stakeholder side, the aspect of burnout through consultation. I don't remember the exact word that she used or the phraseology there, but it's worth noting that yes, we have to meaningfully consult and we have to adopt the stakeholder approach. But there's so many people involved, we cannot overload the communities with information about, we want to know this and this and this and this and this, so that we can meaningfully consult with you and develop a solution that you definitely need. That, okay, take a number, federal government department, 5-letter acronym X. So we have to be sensitive to that. And we have to remember that communities like Qikiqtarjuaq are just one Arctic community. There's 78 other Arctic communities, all with unique interests. But the common challenge throughout the region is a lack of connectivity to the transportation networks of the rest of the world. So I think airships can definitely help with that. And I believe there's also little doubt that there would be demand for an airship sort of cargo service, the delivery service to occupy a position between the once per year sea lift shipment that a lot of these communities get and that very, very expensive airlift shipments that is the only other alternative for shipping in material. Okay, yeah, and I really like with this airship concept too, the move toward hydrogen and electric propulsion. But 40 years ago, Arctic was predicted to be one of the Earth's most sensitive climate regions. Yeah, it turns out it is. So they were validated, unfortunately, I guess. So the concept of a hydrogen-fueled airship that produces very few greenhouse gases would certainly seem to be a solution to Arctic shipping that would receive buy-in from the communities in the region. So there's definitely a need to consult with these communities and with the regions, and with representatives from those communities, but not over consult. So that's a piece that I'm still now having to process that Katrina brought up. So again, I'm really glad we're having this type of discussion. Right, so to be effective at improving connectivity throughout the region, we have to socialize it. How that happens, I don't know, but we cannot just have a military imposed solution for transportation in the Arctic region and think there'll be no issues. That approach has been heavy-handed and has not worked in the past. I don't think it's going to work in the future either. Okay, Norm, so you kind of laid us with some heavy stuff. We got submarines spying on us. We got Russia and Denmark and people going through the strait. Okay, how do we get out of this problem? I don't know how we get out of this problem, but I got a couple ideas. So UNCLOS granted governance, management, and jurisdiction of the Arctic Ocean to 5 countries. Canada is one of those 5 countries. We're one of 5. If Canada's not meeting its responsibility, Canadians need to speak up. It's our responsibility. If we neglect it, what we're producing is an inequitable protection of Canadian rights. Basically, that creates space for a sovereignty void. When there's a void, something wants to come fill that void. No single government department has been exclusively assigned responsibility for Canada's Arctic region in all aspects. So if no one is responsible, then everyone must be. And that's the point I want to bring home here. More people need to take an interest, pose questions to their elected representatives regarding how Canada monitors traffic in its maritime approaches, specifically the Arctic region. And more people need to ask why we don't have a transportation solution to fulfill our Arctic governance responsibilities. More people need to ask why food costs need to differ from Yellowknife to York region, that's in Toronto, when technological solutions exist already that can smooth out pricing from coast to coast to coast. So these are questions that need asking. It needs to be a whole government approach that with consultation. And how does the government get motivated to do anything? It's by people that give them their jobs and elect them, but poking them and asking them hard questions and difficult questions to answer. So anyway, I'll leave it there. I talk really fast. I realized that. I threw a lot of concept, a lot of information at everyone. And I'm happy to take some questions now. I'll stop sharing so I can see everybody again.
Hey, Norm, I'll ask you one of the questions. We have several in the Q&A, and if you have time to answer some through the Q&A, then that might be great, because I don't want to take too much time since we're already at 10:30. But one of the questions, what's the biggest blocker? It's been on the cards for a long time.
The biggest, sorry, is that on the Q&A?
Blocker. It's in the Q&A.
Oh yeah, got it.
What is the biggest blocker?
Nobody wants to take this up as responsibility. There's no OPI. There's no Office of Primary Interest for this. That is it. The military says, yes, we want to do surveillance. We want to do aircraft recovery when there's a downed airplane in the Arctic. So airships are a way to do that. Awesome. Okay. Well, we don't have money. We don't have a budget to pay for it. It's not 100% our mandate. Maybe Department of Transportation. Let's talk to them. Okay. Yeah, but we don't really have the same surveillance requirement. The biggest blocker is there's no single point of contact that's taking this and championing it. Does that answer the question?
I see. Yeah. So you'd have to make it more collaborative, and everybody kind of kicks the ball into somebody else's court. So,
it's like herding cats. We got to herd the cats.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we'll see if we have more time at the end. But thanks a lot. That was fascinating. Let me go ahead and move on to Christine Burow. So Christine Burow is from VP of Marketing at Torngat Metals, responsible for Torngat's marketing, partnering, and ESGI, so environment, sustainability, government initiatives. She's been involved in the rare earths industry since 2013, and she's going to talk to us about cargo airships as a logistics solution for Torngat Metals' rare earth mineral mine in Nunavik in Quebec. So welcome, Christine.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to present today, and what great speakers I'm following up on. They really set the stage for what I want to share. You know, they talked about challenges and opportunities, and how airships could provide solutions to these very challenging problems. And at Torngat, we've spent a lot of time looking at airships, and make no mistake, we're very strong believers in this technology. It's going to come, and we're very strong proponents, and we want to be part of the conversation about enabling cargo airships to come to fruition. I stole this sentence from Madeleine, who's going to speak in a little bit, because I thought it was such a great summary of one of the key messages that I want to share. And this is from her abstract for this conference. And I love the word transform, because I do believe that cargo airships could transform life, both for the communities, for mining development, other economic developments, for Arctic sovereignty, and all of these challenges that we're discussing and trying to figure out. And just another quick question on viable. When I say viable, it's not just the technical viability. Actually, I think that's the easier part around airships. It's also the commercial viability. We also need an ecosystem. We also need concrete first steps. I mean, it's not just one organization who's going to enable this technology to finally be deployed. It needs to be a collaborative effort. And so when we look at viable, I think the technical questions are the easiest one to answer. It's all those other questions about how we set up a new type of transportation system from the ground up, because we need not only the airships, we need the operators, we need the maintenance, we need the terminals. All those things are straightforward to do, but we need to get that all in place and collaboratively. So I'd like to share a little bit more about Torngat and then get into our use case specifically. So what Torngat is aiming to do is to develop a rare earth mine. And so many of you, I'm sure, have heard about rare earths. But for those of you who haven't, they're a group of 15 elements plus 2 that are often considered rare earths. And they're actually ubiquitous. We have a lot of them in deposits all over the world. The challenge is economically viable developments. And the rare earths are used everywhere. And on the left-hand side, you see all the different applications. They're used in glass, they're used in alloy and metal making, they're used in catalyst, and so on and so forth. So they're used in so many different applications. But in terms of the volume, and more importantly by the value, so on the right-hand column of the graphic here, that's the value of the rare earths that are used in something called permanent magnets. So by value and economic importance, permanent magnets are the most important application of rare earths, and it's specifically for rare earths. And I list them here because you might have heard these element names: neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. So there's 17 rare earths, but really the driver is those 4. And when we look at magnets, these permanent magnets, they're used everywhere. There's a long laundry list of applications for these permanent magnets. They're becoming used in more and more applications. And once they get used in those applications, it's very hard to substitute them out. So they become critical to those applications. And the most important one right now, or the 2, is actually drivetrain motors for electric vehicles and for wind turbines. The demand for permanent magnets in those applications alone is going to require a lot more rare earths to be mined and developed. So the drivers behind rare earth demand increase by over 5 times in the coming years. Of course, decarbonization, energy efficiency, electrification, technology developments, and miniaturization. So there's a strong need for these elements. So where Torngat comes in, we have a deposit in northern Quebec, and our goal is to supply responsibly produced, secure, traceable, and cost competitive rare earths that are critical to all these technologies. And these technologies are required as we transition our economy to a low carbon economy and address the environmental challenges that we have. And so for us, a core part of our strategy is ESGI leadership. So environmental, social, and governance. That's the term that people have landed on. In the past, people have called it corporate social responsibility or sustainability, but now the term is environmental, social, and governance. And now we've recognized that doesn't put enough priority on, especially in Canada, and especially as a minor, on Indigenous calculations and all of this, that the Indigenous part of our ESG needs to be throughout everything we do, all of our decisions, and how we engage and how we collaborate and how we consult. And so I just wanted to emphasize in the chart, we have other core parts of our strategy, but being cost competitive suppliers of rare earths, doing that responsibly, and our ESGI strategy is paramount and links to the reason why we are such strong proponents for airships. So this is a graphic just to try to summarize our ESGI strategy. We have looked at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's a best practice now to look at those 20 UN Sustainable Development Goals and pick ones where we can align our strategies with. We've identified the performance metrics that we need to develop and track and report on with regards to environmental, social, and governance. And we've looked at the reporting frameworks that we're going to use to do that. There's always progress in the reporting frameworks. At the bottom, the ones that we've identified that we're planning to report against. Of course, though, as these reporting frameworks evolve, we'll continually reevaluate that. So that's some context. So what is our project? So we are not in production. We're quite a few years from being in production. We're still doing, engineering work and all of the work that you need to do in advance of starting construction. But our project, importantly for this discussion, we're going to have facilities at two sites. One site in the north where the mine is and one site in the south. And splitting our production between these two sites really optimizes our capital investment, our operating costs, and as well provides a lot of important ESG benefits. I can go into detail, but you can ask me afterwards or offline and we can get into more details why we've decided to do that and some of the factors. So just to describe our two sites, at Strange Lake, we're going to have an open pit mine. The rare earths in our deposit are quite close to surface. And we're on site, we're going to build a beneficiation plant to concentrate those rare earths to 15%. And then we're going to ship that concentrate to Bécancour, a heavy industrial park on the St. Lawrence Seaway, halfway between Montreal and Quebec. There's already aluminum smelter there, battery materials plants are going in there. So it's got all the infrastructure and it's got a deep water port. And so it's an ideal location. Of course, Quebec's green, low cost electricity is an important factor in our calculations. So we're going to ship 100,000 tons of concentrate, growing to 150,000 tons and possibly beyond. It will depend on the market demand for our rare earths and what the and we do have potential to expand because our deposit is very large and we're planning to operate it for a very long time. Of course, in the engineering calculations, we're using a 30-year mine life, but we have much more material than a 30-year mine life that we can make economic business case for. So then in the south in Bécancour, we're going to process that concentrate and purify it and separate it into earth products that are ready to go into the market. And from Bécancour, we'll ship these materials all over the world. So, of course, we have two sites. So how do we get the concentrate from Strange Lake, which is our mine site, to Bécancour? That is the challenge. So when we looked at what are the important criteria that we need to think about, we need to think about what are the operating costs going to be, the capital costs, not just the short-term costs, but how the commissioning, the construction, the operation closure, we try to be very comprehensive in how we look at costs, not just a simple calculus of how much it's going to cost A to B on a monthly or daily basis. We also looked at timelines. How long will a solution take to implement? Consultations, of course, what is going to be to the different options that we're considering? What are the permitting implications? How does our choice impact future operational choices? What are the actual providers of these logistics services and the ecosystem that we need? Because certainly for Torngat, our focus is on mining and processing and all of the wraparounds for that in terms of environmental, social, and governance and Indigenous consultations and engagement. We are not looking to be a logistics provider. We're not looking to do things that are outside of our core business. And so we need to ensure that we're going to have the providers who can provide these logistics to us in a cost-effective and also meet our standards in terms of ESGI. We also had to look at what are the variants between the options of quantitative, qualitative factors, what are the risks, the future flexibility, the future liabilities, and does it fundamentally, the choices that we're making, how do they align with our values? So those are the criteria that we put against the options as we looked at how to transport from from Strange Lake to Bécancour. And also, the concentrate shipping is important, but also how do we get the people and the materials to the mine site? That's also an important part of the equation. So these are the two options I want to share with you today. The one is, of course, cargo airships. This, I'll make no surprise to this. This is our preferred option. We'd love it if the airships were available today. We've done a lot of due diligence, and we're convinced that this is the right solution for us. So the route would be from the mine site to go by airship 240 kilometers in a relatively straight line to Schefferville. So Schefferville is a city it's quite a large center. It's the end of a rail line. Schefferville is the hub for iron ore mining in that region. And then from Schefferville, we can leverage the existing railway to Sept-Îles. And from Sept-Îles, we can go by barge to Bécancour. And then at the park, at the industrial park in Bécancour, we just truck it the few kilometers to our site there. So that's the cargo airship option and what that looks like. Then secondly, a road. Sorry, did I miss? Oh, right. So second option is a road. So we've explored this in a lot of detail as well. We looked at different routes because of the terrain and the permafrost, the geography, the lakes and rivers, and we concluded that the most viable option for a road is a 170 kilometer, one lane, summer season road to Vale's nickel mine in Voisey's Bay. We've had a lot of discussion with Voisey's Bay already. They have a port there that's already set up. And from Voisey's Bay, we can ship all the way to Bécancour in the summer months. So for us, that's what we'd have to build is a 170 kilometer single season road. But the important part here in our calculation is that there's no other user for this road. This will be a single user road. So all of the calculations for us has to be on our use case. And that includes, future liabilities, future considerations of, could this be a stranded asset and so on. Now, just a little bit more clarification. We're not actually shipping a lot of concentrate in the scheme of mining. So we can send convoys of trucks carrying 20 tons, a convoy is 6 or 10 trucks to Voisey's Bay, then that convoy turns around. And so we've done the calculations with our engineering firm how much the road will cost to build, how many trucks, how big does the road need to be. And we've tried to find a way that really reduces the footprint of the road, even though we'll have a bit more annual maintenance costs, because of course we'll have to repair to a certain degree. And we're looking at new technologies and new ideas about how to do these roads better, learning from other regions in Canada and other industries, oil and gas, and forestry. They've developed a lot of understanding about how you do these kind of roads. And so with our engineering firm, we think this is a very viable option. And in fact, because the airships aren't ready, we'll be looking to implement this option. That's one of our decisions we're going to be making soon. Do we pursue this option while we look to the airships to be commercialized? So those are those two options. So I know many of you are interested then in the economics, because it sounds great. Lots of benefits to the airships we've already seen, not just for us as a miner, but of course, the previous two presenters spoke to all of the potential benefits that they could see. So those are also important. So, but in our case, our economics, I'll share with you the highlights. So the parameters for this economic assessment is 240 kilometers of travel by the airship. And of course, for the airship, this was mentioned by Norm, you need, from a point of view of what's possible, but it's also important from the point of view of the economics, is you want the airship to be in the air. You don't want the airship to be in the ground. So you want to maximize the time in the air. And this is important as well, that we need multiple users, ideally, to be using the airship from the earliest days of when these actually are available, so that we can manage capacity utilization. It's very important to the economics. So the parameters for these calculations is 150,000 tons of concentrate shipped per year. The calculations here is with a 100-ton cargo airship, 330 days a year. We've done weather and climate studies at our mine site and at Schefferville. So that's actually a bit less than what we were told is possible. So we think that's conservative, although we do need to redo our weather and climate studies, because there are changes. We're not seeing historical weather patterns like we used to. The biggest challenge that causes the number of days that the airship can be flying is actually wind. It's not cold. It's not ice and snow, it's wind. At some point, the winds will be too high, and you bring the airship into the air and you ride it out. As same idea as a ship on the ocean. If there's a storm coming, you don't stay at port, you go out to sea, and that's where you ride out the storm. So that's the main driver of 330 days operational per year, 24/7 operation. And in fact, the cold is more of an issue to the people than the airship. So at some point, there's going to be some days where operations will be impacted by the cold to protect the people. And as I mentioned, we're of course, the economics are driven by shipping out this concentrate of rare earths, but also we can leverage the backhaul. We can bring in people, supplies, equipment every day, multiple times a day. So it reconfigures how we think about what needs to be at mine site, because everything we do at mine site is more expensive and more challenging for the people rotating in and out than if we could bring back some activities, for example, to Schefferville. And we're not planning to own airships. We're not airship owners, maintenance people, operators. We're looking to lease the airship, long-term contracts, looking for operators and all of the support we need around them. So based on those parameters, we've calculated, and this is not, a back of the envelope kind of calculation. These are detailed calculations done with a lot of due diligence, a lot of research, a lot of discussions with experts, with people developing airships. We do have one favored airship developer, but that's a conversation for another time. So we've calculated our leasing costs, our maintenance costs, all of those costs, what we think the operator would charge us at $20 million a year. These are US figures because we do most of our calculations US dollars because of the business that we're in. So that's the all-in cost for using the cargo airship for us a year. And so that $20 million, that's just for shipping by airship. And then we've got all the other costs, rail, shipping, and the barging, and so on. But that, to put that number in context, this mine will be having revenues of upwards of $500 million a year, maybe $1 billion. I mean, the prices of rare earths are very strong right now. These elements are very critical. So we've in fact used very conservative numbers in our calculations, because this is a mine that's going to be operating over decades. So actually our economics, we developed them with prices that are below today's prices. And the prices, in fact, will continue to be strong just because the demand for these are so strong. So putting that 20 million in context against 500 million of revenue, I mean, we're not shipping a low value commodity. We're shipping very high value material that goes into all of these high tech applications. And so that turns into 25 cents per ton of concentrate shipped per kilometer. And so what does that mean for Torngat? This part of this airship cargo shipping would be less than 10% of our total cost. It's actually a percentage point less, but round numbers, less than 10% of our total cost. So even if we've made a miscalculation and maybe the initial airships for some reason will be more expensive than we've understood, we can absorb some extra costs. And of course, like any other new technology, the initial technology is more expensive. And then as there's a learning curve, the costs will come down. And we believe that once airships are commercialized, the demand will be very high. And there'll be a big opportunity for economies of scale and all of this learning to reduce the cost. So from an economic point of view, we are absolutely convinced that this technology will meet our needs. It is cheaper than, when we get to 100-ton shipping capacity per load, it's cheaper than a road. When we go out to Voisey's Bay, we can only ship 6 months a year. So we're only going to run the road 6 months a year. And so that does mean we have a higher working capital cost because we have to inventory material because the plant in Bécancour needs to run all year. When we look at the economics, there are aspects of the economics we haven't even tried to calculate. As I mentioned, we can transfer some activities from mine site to, for example, Schefferville, and there are big cost implications of that, but we haven't even tried to put numbers to that yet. So when we go back, am I okay for time? Just let me know if I need to go quicker. So when we go back,
a couple minutes left.
Okay, I'm almost done. So when we go back to that list of needs and considerations I showed a few slides ago, and we look at the cargo airship assessment, you see check marks all down this list. We believe the airships are economically attractive. It's actually lower capital cost than a road because we're going to lease the airship. So of course the costs are still there, but it allows us to have a different economic model that's quite favorable to us. When we look at the life cycle costs though as well, there's huge differences when you look at the total life cycle of these two logistics solutions. Because as a miner, we need to plan not only for commissioning and operation, but closure. Even if we're not planning on closure for a long time, we do need to put that into our planning, and we need to set aside money for that closure. I mean, there's economic implications for what our closure plan is, regardless of when we execute that closure plan. It's the requirement for a miner to put aside those closure costs. So having a road as part of your closure costs is not an insignificant challenge. Timelines, certainly deploying airships, if they were available and certified, is much faster than any other logistics solution. Consultations, I mean, of course, there is a lot of education and engagement that we need. These are different new technologies. People can't point to them and see them flying around. So there's understanding the implications, and these airships fly lower, so is there an impact on the wildlife and so on. We need to engage in those discussions in a way that works for the communities that we're going to be engaging with. But on the flip side to that as well, we come in with a huge amount of benefits to explore for the communities, for the jobs, and so on. And so it's great to come in to those consultations having so much to offer with this type of solution. Permitting for a road is very it requires a lot of effort and consultations in of itself. Future flexibility. If we grow or shrink the amount of concentrate we ship, the airship can flex with that. You know, the airships can be redeployed. So if we want to change airships, that airship can be used by someone else. Or if we want to go up or down in size or have more, there's a lot more flexibility. You can't do that with a road. Of course, we need the people and the companies to build this ecosystem together. And as we've talked, and today is a great opportunity, but we've talked to a lot of users and people who want to be a part of this ecosystem, to be part of the supply chain. There's a growing interest and enthusiasm about this. So we have quite high confidence that we can collaboratively set up this ecosystem that makes sense for everyone, that there's an economic business case for everyone, as well as all these other benefits, ESGI benefits, that some of which you can turn into numbers and some of which you don't. And just such a, as I said at the beginning, stealing Madeleine's word, it's a transformation. And then risks is just a different set of risks, both short, medium, and long term. Future flexibility, future liabilities. It's a better assessment for the cargo airship, and fundamentally it aligns with our values. As a company, we're trying to set up this operation with value, not driven by the return on investment, but driven by our ESGI, which will in fact improve our ROI. So we're just flipping the normal paradigm of how we look at this. And I haven't mentioned this, but on top of that, the consumers, the buyers of our products are looking to us to provide them resource, rare earths. We're going to be competing with China as well as other places like Australia, and more, whether you're talking about the auto supply chain, they're going back into their supply chain and setting a different bar of what they expect. And so we need to do that. It's ESGI is table stakes now, and we want to be there and as well go above and beyond it, and that will drive our economics. So alignment with values is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the economic thing to do.
Christine,
yes.
This is fast. Well, okay, one more. This is
this
fascinating.
is my last slide, and you guys.
I wish I could hear you talk for an hour, but just don't want to cheat the last speaker.
Yeah, no, I've covered all of this. This is just a summary. I mean, lower CO2 emissions, everyone's aware of that opportunity here with airships. Everybody's talking about that already in the presentations today and in Barry's opening remarks. So this is just another way to summarize the points that I've already made. So I'll stop there.
One question before, and we may have time to circle back, a few people have asked them, but if Torngat Metals becomes the anchor client for the first cargo heavy lift airship, then will you completely occupy that? Or might there be opportunities for other people who are interested in these from the demand side to also use some of the time of that airship?
Yes, that is definitely a possibility. We won't know until we know which airship we're going to be able to use.
Okay.
But our intention is to, and our self-interest is to make sure there are as many other end users as possible, because that helps us. That lowers the cost for us in the longer term, and we plan to operate in the longer term. So the more end users, the better. We as well see whether it's a regular end user who needs the airship once a week or once a month, we will go and, we will go out of our way to figure out a way to make that work. But as well, there might be situations where there's a disaster or an emergency. We will look to put in some capability to support the communities, to support the regions around us in times of need, in times of crisis. We're going to plan that from the beginning to ensure that we can do that.
Yeah, well, that's actually a very good segue to our next speaker. Madeleine Redfern is an Indigenous businesswoman involved in high tech and innovation and actively engaged in transformative technologies in telecommunications, transport, and energy. She's the CEO of Can-Arctic Inuit Networks, and very interested in building fiber optic cable into Canada's Arctic, and in general, highly involved in a lot of organizations that are working for the development of that region. So very nice to meet you, Madeleine, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much. So the reason why I'm particularly interested and involved in the issue of airships and actually other technologies, as you just spoke regarding subsea marine fiber optic cable, as well as SMRs, which are small modular reactors, is recognizing that we need transformative technologies and that can dramatically and significantly bring about positive change in Canada's Arctic, and that these should be carefully examined to determine their viability or feasibility and applicability in our region. So not just transformative technologies for the sake of innovation, but also transformative technologies that can truly change the way that we live and the way that we do business in our remote and hyper remote Arctic communities, especially those communities that are only available through road access and do therefore have very limited types of ways in which goods and people can be moved in and out of our territory. So Nunavut, where I'm from, is approximately 2 million square kilometers. It has 25 communities of approximately 38, soon to be 40,000 people. But there are many other communities in Canada's rural remote parts of our country. There are a few communities in Northwest Territories, but also Northern Quebec, some of our northern regions of Ontario and Manitoba that can only be have only fly-in access. In the short summer season, there's also ships that are able to deliver goods, but the number of ships, again, is dependent on the size of the community, the location, and how many goods or materials are required for that particular year, as well as the shipping companies, of which there are predominantly two, at least in my region. They've got to try to manage their small fleet. So there's a tremendous amount of scheduling issues. As depending on where you are and depending again on the season, there can be tremendous issues regarding ice conditions. So in Iqaluit, we usually have our first sea lift around the first week of July, but there will have been particular years. I recall in about 2012, there was almost a 6-week delay in getting our first sea lift because there was a lot of seasonal ice that had come into our bay and completely choked up. So the ships were unable to navigate through those pieces of ice. And to just give people a sense of, what that cost implication is to the shipping company, that's anywhere between $75,000 to $100,000 per day. And as a result, what it ends up also doing is that it increases costs to the end customer, because the shipping company has to try to offset those costs or losses. Therefore, the majority of our food is actually flown up, especially our perishable food. from locations such as Winnipeg or Ottawa or Montreal. In the eastern regions, they'll tend to be flown from, northern Quebec will get flown from Montreal, Ontario from other southern locations, whether it's Winnipeg, again for Manitoba, or from Yellowknife into the communities that are in the Northwest Territories. Someone did mention earlier ice roads, and again, a very unique type of transportation, which is now becoming more and more challenging as climate change impacts those communities. And we're seeing the shortening of those seasons, either both at the front end and at the back end, and the loss of trucks on those rivers or lakes, or just the impassability of on roads that are just in atrocious conditions. So, I think most of the speakers before me gave people a good, a relatively good sense of the transportation limitations and challenges. There is, I think, a good or a need for an assessment of the feasibility and viability of airships as a supplemental potential means of air transportation of non-perishable foods, construction materials, business and office supplies. And I do want to sort of touch on, the fact that we fly up so much of our food, absolutely contributes to the high cost of food. Someone did mention that. I was just taking a look at the Canadian North website, and depending on where you're flying goods to and the type of goods, you're looking at a cost of anywhere from approximately $5 or $20 or more per kilogram of food. And that's why we have the federal government has a program called Nutrition North, which attempts to subsidize and reduce the cost of at least nutritious food. But even with that program, that's almost $100 million a year, food prices are still, significantly higher, and does contribute to food insecurity. In Nunavut, we have, depending on which research that you're looking at, anywhere between 35 to almost 80% of our residents in our communities struggling with food insecurity. There's one sort of stat that I like to say, or wish I didn't have to say, is 8 out of 10 Nunavut Inuit preschool children are food insecure. And almost every Inuit household does have preschool children. It's very, very troubling and discouraging. The cost of construction in Canada's north, where there are no roads, is absolutely astronomical. Before COVID, it was estimated that construction was $400 a square foot. Since COVID, costs have dramatically increased. In Iqaluit, the city is building 18 affordable housing units. I believe 12 are to be 1 bedrooms and 6 to be 2 bedrooms at a cost of almost $600,000 per unit. Now, any construction project requires at least 2, if not 3 years of lead time. And part of that is because of the logistical challenges. If you want to build, such a development like that, or an office complex, or a health center, or an addictions treatment center, one of the biggest challenges will be, not just securing the goods, is actually booking the space that you need on the sea lift. So you have to do that early on, ideally by January for a ship that summer season. And if you do not secure that space early on, you will literally lose and miss a year of construction because you've missed the boat. even if you manage to secure that space, one of the things that many of us are very aware of is that for the smaller communities, where especially if they only get one sea lift a year, a project will end up displacing potentially existing orders and goods, or prevents those customers from being able to do their projects, because it may not be possible for the shipping company to lay on an additional second ship if it's not enough space. So again, you might luck out by securing space, but other businesses or other projects may be delayed by a year, or they have to be flown up. The other thing that's important to understand is that businesses have to ship up a year's supply of goods and products for our communities. So a year's supply of toilet paper, a year's supply of dog food, tinned tomatoes, pasta, rice, office supplies and products. And there's a tremendous cost to businesses that have to front those costs for those goods. And then those goods require storage and warehousing space. So a lot of business in Southern Canada or rest of the world, manage their product inventory very carefully, but they don't need to have on hand a year's supply. This also requires, of course, having the storage or the space in which to be able to have that, and space that the goods are not going to get damaged. So you can't necessarily store paper products, for your printer in an outdoor sea container in certain parts of the year, because it's going to get moisture and therefore damage. So you're adding the combination of the transportation costs, transportation limitations, the cost of construction for storage, the challenges regarding even doing those construction projects, and then just the high cost of living, is all a contributing factor as to why and how it is so expensive, for businesses and for residents to live in the North. This all comes to, therefore, the potential value of at least reviewing and assessing, whether airships can be supplemental and complementary. If you're able, if there is a good business case to demonstrate that, moving non-perishable foods, that construction material, year round, instead of, during that very short window, the ability to bring in, other goods, whether it's for a business that runs a garage and mechanics or any of those, then you truly may have the opportunity of bringing down significant costs, running a business or living in our Arctic remote communities. That's why I'm particularly keen and interested in at least, the Canadian Arctic Innovation Association, which has received funding to do this feasibility and viability study. It could be a total game changer if deemed, viable. It would be looking at the existing sort of transportation realities and costs. It would be looking at where the launch points of the airships could possibly be, where it would be the end of the rail or the end of the road. So possibly Shefferville, Churchill, Yellowknife and or Nuvik, Tuktoyaktuk. And then sort of, market size, of course, is important. Christine spoke to, her client and mine. There's quite a number of mines that are in operation or potentially could be in operation. And so you're looking for all synergies, all, potential existing or new markets that might become viable with these transformative technologies, that can make sense. So I'm excited at least to look into, airships. And we know that there's a number of different companies that different price points, different sort of stages of development, different sizes, different technologies, and seeing, under what circumstances or under what conditions airships could be deemed viable, and whether or not there would be the need or the requirement of government support and or government subsidies, because we're already seeing government subsidies significantly in play, from the Nutrition North program, energy subsidies, transportation subsidies. And so you need to also consider whether or not those subsidies could be better utilized in a way that could support something like airships. So it's a complicated assessment because it's a complicated reality, but it doesn't mean that we can't and shouldn't just consider potential opportunities or options for transformative technologies, and recognizing that this doesn't necessarily undermine or replace plane cargo and or sea lift. So I'm pretty excited at least that the feasibility and the viability study will begin shortly, and what those findings might be. Thank you.
Madeleine, thank you very much. That's fascinating to hear that perspective. And I think just from what I know about it, I think that absolutely many of those realities would be dramatically transformed by airships. I think you definitely could see construction becoming much cheaper. I think you could see food becoming cheaper if airships were built to scale. My doubt would be whether there's enough demand in that market to get over the R&D hurdle, which is why I think it's important to have multiple sources of demand coming together, which I think is one of the things that's valuable about a conference like this, to help people who are on the demand side become aware of each other and maybe form sort of a coalition that can then help to demonstrate to builders, to investors, that there will be uses for these once they're built. Now, having said all that, there was a question earlier that Katrina Nokleby raised about over consultation, and I was curious to what your perspective on that might be, just sort of burnout with engagement, because I can imagine on the one hand, I would love to be able to tell these communities, hey, there's hope. But on the other hand, it could be years away. There's uncertainties around it. And that would give me some pause. So, I mean, are you seeing sort of burnout with engagement in communities that you're in touch with?
I presume that's a question to me.
Yes, it's a question to you.
It depends on the type of consultation or engagement. So if you're talking about, which I've seen, Inuit organizations, a federal government, a territorial government, doing consultation or engagement on the exact same issue separately, is a bizarre sort of, approach, and utterly frustrates the communities and the residents. So there is need and value to have the different groups work collaboratively and to coordinate. They may have very different, reasons or perspectives on the matter being consulted. And the community is, members are smart and sophisticated enough to understand that, and not have to go out to 3 different sessions on 3 different days, 3 different times. And there's also, I think, consultation fatigue on issues that have been consulted a lot. So anything that is different or new and with an explanation of its value or potential, assessment, like airships or small modular reactors, or transformative telecommunications, whether that is subsea fiber optic cables and or LEOs, is unique and different enough that I think community members would be interested in. So it's really important to have a good, consultation plan and strategy, and that you provide information beforehand to those communities so that they're well primed and prepped. I love, sending out an FAQ beforehand, who's coming, an introduction, the agenda. Unfortunately, more often than not, what happens is that there's a notice of consultation, venue, date, time, and what the topic is, but no information shared to the community beforehand. So that is usually results in low uptake and possibly the need to do further consultation rather than good consultation from the onset.
Right, I see. Yeah, thank you. Another question I have here. So you were talking about a feasibility study. Do you know where the data for that study will be taken from? And the question also suggests the airship community should provide the technical logistic data. Do you know whether they'll be reaching out to the airship community in order to find out that kind of logistic data for the study?
Well, it's from what I understand, Barry is Prentice and his team are taking the lead on sort of the research that will be done. Barry's network is quite extensive. Of course, it's important to reach out to the companies that are in R&D development. It's also important to ensure that one, looks at the research that's necessary on the ground and making those matches and connections. So there's a team of us with our distinct roles, and looking at government funding, looking at various interests and opportunities. So I would say the goal is to ensure that it's extensive but relevant, and so that we don't miss out key or critical elements of that study to, as I said, ultimately deem whether these airships are viable or feasible and under what conditions that they are. We're also very aware that there's also another sort of research being done, and that there needs to be synergy or coordination to ensure that there isn't overlap. I'm a big believer in cooperation in research and divvying out the work and filling in the gaps, and ultimately sort of seeing these two projects align with each other rather than assessments that are inadequate, because if they're inadequate, ultimately they're not as you want that to then determine whether or not there is a business case for airships and under what conditions those business cases would, as I said, be not only technically viable but also financially viable. Right.
Well, thank you very much. I guess we have a few minutes for questions, and I had a bunch of questions for Christine Burow, if you're still on, Christine.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I looked briefly at the chat, so I'll try to answer a bunch of questions in one, and you can tell me. Okay. I'm sure I've missed some. So yeah, we want to be an early adopter. We'd be happy to be the first one. We don't see, usually when you're the first one, there's a certain element of risk. We think that risk is very manageable. We want to, and our idea, of course, is that we're a perfect anchor first user, because we have a constant need. Like we'd be shipping multiple times a day. So we have the ability to have the capacity utilization work. So we calculated, and it's roughly about 100 kilometers. The flight, one of the questions was the flight speed, which of course impacts the economics and the business case, about 100 kilometers an hour. It depends. So, and I used the 100-ton calculation because for us, we're a long-term operation. And so what what matters most is what is the economics once this gets going. The economics, of course, are different in the first couple of years, but that's where we need to be. So whether we use a smaller airship for the first few years, if that's the way to get it going, we're open to doing that. We're keen to do that, and then use more than one airship for those first few years, and then redeploy those airships, and then acquire a bigger airship for our use case. I think that answers some of the questions that were posed.
Yeah. Well, one question was, how close is the industry to having a 100-ton airship?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the airship developer that we're talking to, and we've talked to many of them, you know, we think that for some of them, it's not so much a technical question. It's the investment required to go from production of the first few units. You know, it's that inertial barrier, right? It's how do you get sufficient investment to go through that last phase of engineering and the certification, where there's a big investment with some uncertainty. It's that barrier we have to overcome. I think the technology is not that far away. It's getting people, especially because this is new. Like, it's not just the airship, it's the end users, it's the ecosystem, it's the operators, it's the maintenance, it's where do we have these nodes, because this is starting from ground up. So that just adds to the inertia, the financial investment required, and the fact that an investor looks at this and they say, well, there's a lot of things that need to be done at the same time. How is that actually going to happen? I think that's the challenge. And I think, to Madeleine's point about the government could play a role in de-risking this technology. It's not even so much the dollars we need, which, although they are important, and the government could deploy their resources in a more efficient way, instead of subsidizing something that's expensive, lower the costs and lower the subsidy and use that investment. But so that's, you know, I think this will get to the point where it doesn't need ongoing subsidies. I mean, the uses and the transformation of the costs will justify it. What we need is, what would be ideal is the government looking at the Arctic sovereignty, the poverty and food insecurity, and the construction and the lack of housing and the lack of ability to develop businesses and all of that. And if they look at that and they say, wow, this is worth us de-risking this, that I think would be a great role for them to play, to get over this inertial barrier we have. Because I think once you see the first ones deploy, people can look at them and say, oh, okay, I get it. It makes sense. I can see it. It works. These things aren't going to, you know, crash. There, you know, all of those sort of preconceptions that people have will go away if we saw the first ones flying. Is how do you get the first ones in the air?
Especially if the risks are themselves coming from the regulators. If the risks are regulatory as much as technological. I
don't think it's regulatory. I think you don't get the challenge with the regulators until you have a ship for them to look at. You know, they're not going to do anything. You know, you need to have the ship that they fly for their hours and they can see it. You know, the developers know what the criteria are going to be against which they're going to regulate it. So I think it's just getting those first few ships built. That's, you know, that's the challenge. And then I think everything else will flow quite quickly, because there's a lot of money to be made for everybody in the chain.
Well, I better cut this off because I think we're about to start our next session. Thank you very much. We do have a plan to pull stuff from the Q&A and then try to drum up some answers to those questions, maybe post them on the isopolar side on a selective basis. We'll see if we manage to pull that off, but there's a lot of questions that came in, and so we'd like to respond to a few that we didn't have time for. But having said that, I'll finish up and pass to Nicole, I think, for the next round of speakers.
Well, just before you do that, Nathan, let me thank you and also the panelists for the morning. Tremendous talks. Wonderful to see all the various dimensions, and I think you really covered it beautifully. But without further ado, then let's move to our next moderator, which is Nicole Mata, who is also a member of the team that's putting together the webinars and the conferences. And Mada, over to you, or Nicole, sorry, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Maida, and although I'm currently in the event industry, my passion for aviation innovation has grown over the past few years from my previous role at Toronto Pearson Airport, and as well as gaining the knowledge from Barry and his team, as well as all the wonderful panelists we have here today. So our next speaker is from Hamburg, Germany, and is well known in the aviation industry. He is a senior aeronautical engineer, expert in flight physics, and airship architect. He has profound knowledge in aerodynamics, flight simulation, and is a big contributor in the airship industry through many facets, including LTA technologies. I am pleased to welcome Johannes Eissing to speak to us today on our topic of green airships. Welcome, Johannes.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Yes, I think I will be getting a little bit more technical here, to the technical side, and try to shed some light on the question on how green are airships actually, or why are they supposed to be green. Let me try and share my screen. So how green are airships? The question everyone, or we often hear that airships are CO2 emission reducing technology, and I will try and go into some details. First, I will talk about the flight path 2050 and where and why airships can be superior. What are obstacles of airship development? That was the question that has been put up in the chat. And what could be a way forward? So let's start with the flight path 2050. I am from Europe. Flight path 2050 is actually Europe's vision for aviation, and it's the report of the EU high-level group on aviation research. And the goals, or some of the goals for 2050 as compared to 2000, are on one hand safety. So the aim is 80% reduction of the number of accidents for search and rescue missions, and manned and unmanned air vehicles to safely operate in the same airspace. And it's about emissions. The aim is 65% reduction of noise emissions, 75% reduction in CO2 emissions, and you see 90% reduction in NOx emissions. And that's quite demanding, but also about cost. So the aim is to reduce cost and certification about 50%. So how to do this? Can airships contribute there? And yeah, so why can airships be superior? So here I will be talking about lighter than air. What is this? What is efficiency? What is safety? And what is cost? These were the points issued by Flight Path 2050. So what is this? If we hear the word aircraft, most of us would think about a flying thing with wings, an airplane, but aircraft is a more general term. It includes heavier than air aircraft. Let me get the laser pointer here. Heavier than air aircraft, also called aerodynes, which are fixed wing aircraft and rotor wing aircraft or helicopters. And we have lighter than air aircraft like aerostats, also called LTA for lighter than air. Here we have balloons that are the oldest contraptions that fly. And then we have airships or dirigibles. So a dirigible is basically a balloon that can be steered. Most of you will know that the Wright brothers, so some historical background, right? But also performance-wise, that the Wright brothers did fly in December 1903 in Kitty Hawk for some 59 seconds over a distance of 260 meters. And not so many do know that 2 years earlier, Alberto Santos Dumont did a controlled powered flight with a duration of 13 minutes and a range of 15 kilometers. And he was doing this standing and wearing a proper hat, actually. So the first Atlantic crossing was said had been done in June 1919 by John Alcock and Arthur Whittam Brown, his navigator. He did cross the Atlantic west to east. And in the very same year, just 1 month later, Major George Herbert Scott crossed the Atlantic with 31 crew, east-west, and back east and underway, they found, whoops, we have a blind passenger, and whoops, we have a cat that was then called Whoopsie. So further achievements are, for example, the L-55 that did fly in 1917 to an altitude of 7,600 meters, or the well-known Africa ship, the L-59, that did fly the same year for 95 hours, non-stop, unrefueled for 6,757 kilometers, carrying 50 tons of useful load. So I will come to the definition of useful load later. And so concerning payload or useful load and range, this has been achieved by fixed-wing aircraft some 40 years later, for example, by the Douglas DC-132 Cargo Master. But everyone would say, okay, an airplane is faster. How can this be compared? And this is where I will try and explain a little bit about efficiency or transport efficiency. So efficiency basically is the ratio of gain to effort. And gain being here productivity, what is useful load times speed. This is like a mass flow in a pipeline, for example. It's measured in ton kilometers per hour because time matters, of course. And the power you need to do this, to provide this productivity in terms of engine power. And I use installed power because you find it's easy to find data on useful load, on speed, and then installed power of different aircraft. So if you go and plot some data, so let me explain this plot here. I here have the productivity in ton kilometers per hour. It's on a logarithmic scale. And this is plotted versus installed engine power in horsepower. So here we have some fixed wing aircraft. This is the Airbus A400M, the C-130 Hercules, this is the Transall, I think. And you see, okay, here is a trend. So for a certain amount of installed power, you get some productivity in return. And so these are military transport airplanes, okay, with propellers. So if I compare these with helicopters or rotary wing aircraft, can be seen, of course, there's no big wonder. For the same installed power, if we go up this line here, for the same installed power, you get only about 1/4 of productivity from a helicopter. This is because helicopters are slower and they are less efficient, but let us not forget they are capable of vertical takeoff and landing, what is quite a capability. So then people have tried and do something in between. Tilt rotors, for example, that's a mix of a rotary wing aircraft and a fixed wing aircraft. And yes, they are faster. And yes, they are more efficient because they have wings, but they are very heavy, right? Because this complex technology takes uses a lot of weight actually, and this is then missing in the useful weight, in the useful load. So where do we have airships in this plot? This is here, very much more to the left, so much lesser installed power. So, and how can we read this plot? If we go on this line here, like for the same productivity we have here for fixed wing aircraft, we need only 1/3 of installed power to provide this productivity, right? Or we also can say, comparing it to helicopters. So with the same installed power, I can offer 10 times more productivity. So, and this of course has, and I will come to this later, just to be very blunt, this efficiency you see at helicopters is rather bad, but let's not forget, they can do vertical takeoff and landing. And so the efficiency of fixed wing aircraft is of course better. They are faster and they have wings, and they are more efficient, but still this all can be topped for low speed missions by airships. So I won't go into details here. It's just to tell you that, yes, there are numbers behind this. And I have some fixed wing aircraft, 3 tilt wing aircraft, 3 rotary wing aircraft or helicopters, like here the NH-19 or the Sky Crane, and some airships ranging from the Hindenburg to the Africa ship that I showed before. And it's amazing that this very old technology is looking so good compared to contemporary aviation technology. So safety. let's spend a few words on safety. Airships feature the so-called balloon mode. So an airship pilot I worked with said, don't use the E word. In case of an all engines out incident, this is not an emergency. So while in an airplane, if you have an all engines out, you have to know what to do right away, and you have to know your procedures and everything, while in an airship, when all engines are out or inoperative, it's basically like, oh, all the engines are out. Let me get the flight manual and look up what to do. So this is certification-wise quite a thing. And so if an airship comes down, it comes down very slowly. So it falls slowly, and this has an impact, let me say, on impact energy. So if it hits the ground, and this is like the ground risk that is to be taken into account when you do a risk assessment, the impact energy is relatively low for airships. And airships are large, airships are slow, so the visibility is very good. That means, particularly if you look at UAS or UAVs, they can be seen very early on, for example, by fast flying rescue helicopters or so. So in this case, size does matter. And downwash. So airships have almost no downwash, right? And this is much safer for passengers, sometimes called PAX or PAX, and also for ground crew. Cost. So how expensive is an airship? I won't provide numbers here, just directions. So if you look at certification costs and you compare a commuter airplane and a commuter airship, the airworthiness requirements in Europe called CS for certification specifications. This is what in the US would be like the FAR Part 23 or Part 25 for transport airplanes, has about 420 pages, and the equivalent document for airships has about 80 pages, right? This means less paragraphs, less work, less costs. And for transport airplanes, it's very similar, let me say. So yes, you have to prove that your airship is airworthy, that you have taken into account all the risks, but because of the inherent safety of the balloon mode, it's much easier. And DOC, direct operating cost, and engines. So engines are like a lion's share in operating costs for airplanes, because they are lion's share in acquisition cost, and so they are a big share in depreciation, part of the direct operating cost. Less engine, less maintenance, and less fuel burn, of course. And I forgot to say here that we also have, of course, less emissions. Airships are flying low and slow, and speed and altitude being cost drivers. Flying at low altitude, you do not need oxygen systems, and you do not need cabin pressurization, both being adding to cost, of course. And at low speeds, you have a low dynamic pressure, a low aerodynamic pressure, lower aerodynamic loads, lower inertial loads, and Mach effects. Well, no, we don't have Mach effects with airships. So this eases development quite a bit. What are obstacles for airship development? So first of all, I have here speed. I just said speed is a benefit, but it also means that airplanes and helicopters are faster, and passengers, PAX, are time-critical cargo. They don't like to wait. Be them you are on a tourist flight, on a scenic sightseeing flight or something, then you want to fly slow. But for passenger transportation, it is slow, yes. And yes, you need infrastructure. You need a hangar for assembly and maintenance and repair. You need a mast not for every load exchange, right? So load exchange without a mast has been shown. It's common practice actually, but you need a mast if you want to park your airship somewhere outdoors, not in a hangar. You need helium supply, and of course you need trained ground crew. So not every airport provides these means. So concerning speed, to the right-hand side, you see the Carnan-Gabrielli diagram showing our three friends here, the emojis, helicopters having a relatively high specific tractive force, like a resistance or drag. And speed-wise, they are just in the middle between airplanes and airships. Airplanes, again, being faster, being more efficient, but airships here are somewhere between like cruise ferries and trains, efficiency-wise. And yes, they are a little slower, but still faster than ships and trucks. Other obstacles are prejudice. So what I always hear is, but the side wind, you have these large lateral area, and if there is a wind and everything, well, airships usually do not fly sidewards. So as a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, airships do not do crosswind starts and landing like airplanes do, like here, where you fly in a crab approach and then do your decrab, and then finally wind, and here you're exposed to side wind. You don't have this, for example, with the Zeppelin NT. And then, but they are so slow. Okay, so airships are certified to withstand wind speeds on the mast of 17 knots. That is equivalent to both for 12 or a very severe storm. So 70 knots is hence a common top speed for airships. It does not make sense, in my humble opinion, to go much faster because the loads are higher. That means that the structure is heavier. You have less useful load. And also you burn much more fuel because the power demand goes up with the cube of speed. So, and then you always hear, but the Hindenburg exploded. So all the airworthiness requirements that I know, or most, have a paragraph saying the lifting gas must be non-flammable. So while hydrogen is of course being discussed, of course, and most authorities would say we are not emotional, we are willing to debate here, it's much easier to have helium. And then coming back to the Hindenburg, 62 out of the 79 persons on board actually survived. Another obstacle is reinvention of the wheel. So we have a lot of excessively heavy airships. We have lenticular airships being reinvented again and again. And we have variable buoyancy airships, also a matter of frequent reinvention, while airships actually did fly in World War I under flak and proved quite airworthy. So what could be a way forward? I will be talking here briefly about LTA UAVs or UAS, about fuel gas, fuel cells, photovoltaics, HAPS, and the DELEC. LTA UAVs, so these are 3 projects I was involved with. And if you do a risk assessment, a SORA, what is a special operations risk assessment, what you need to do if you want to fly commercially or scientifically with an airship, you find, wow, an airship is very safe, right? And this is why it's relatively easy to get a permit to flight and to fly even over a populated area. And on top, airships provide endurance. So this is why we see more and more airship UAVs. And fuel gas, yeah, like 9 years ago, the Graf Zeppelin flew around the world on fuel gas or blau gas, how they call it. They flew with 30 tons of fuel with more or less no weight. Of course, it had weight, but it provided its own buoyancy, so it does not fall down, so it has no weight. And this is a total redefinition of the energy density, a total redefinition of the Breguet range equation. And if you fly with biogas, you have your airship even greener. So fuel cells, just briefly, I saw we had some people from Kalu in the audience here. This is also projects I have heavily been involved in. They're flying with a fuel cell and with hydrogen as a lifting gas because they said, hey, if we fly with a fuel cell to enhance our endurance and we have to deal with hydrogen anyway, why not using hydrogen then also as a lifting gas? And this is a quite innovative approach. I really like it. So thumbs up for Kalu. Photovoltaics is, yes, airships do have a large surface area. That means photovoltaics gets very interesting. On blimps, we have the trouble, let me say, or the issue, the challenge that the photovoltaic panels get very hot. And the heat affects the envelope material and also the lifting gas superheat. So if you would put photovoltaics on a rigid airship, I think this has not been done so far as I'm aware. The outer cover of a rigid airship is actually secondary structure. And there's an air insulation layer between the outer cover and the gas cells. So very briefly on high altitude pseudo satellites, there are quite a few projects around. I have been involved here in Ecosat, Spain. And coming to the DELEC, so I'm not only a member of the Airship Association, a council member, I'm also a member of the Germany-based Aerarium registered nonprofit association. So this is what EV stands for. So Aerarium is promoting lighter than air technology since the 90s. And it runs a couple of project labs on lighter than air systems. It does remotely controlled flight tests, and it provides a scientific airship UAV for an external customer. And it has two working groups. One is aero modeling. So we are doing an FAI rated international competitions, and it has a working group DELEC. So I'm running out of time, I see. So DELEC, the aim of the DELEC working group is to establish the registered airship owner cooperative DELEC. So what is for Deutsche Luftschiff Eingetragene Genossenschaft, it's a registered cooperative, and the business case is to have airships built, certified, and maintained externally, to own these airships and to lease them out to airship operators. So the airship we are looking at is a commuter category that is below 15 tons maximum takeoff weight, 19 passengers. It's a classical rigid structure, but with enhanced maneuverability. And our benchmark is the AZ-120 Bodensee that has been operated commercially. And the strategy is to Aerarium to establish the TRL process. TRL is for technical readiness level, to derive a solid business plan from this and to establish the registered cooperative. The status is we have established the TRL process for our product, for our idea, and Aerarium is working on the TRL1 review, and we will be presenting on maneuverability at the Delta S conference in Mumbai in June 2022. So summing up the presentation, for missions requiring low and slow, flying low and slow, vertical takeoff and landing, zero downwash, and low noise, airships can actually answer Flight Path 2050 goals for reducing emissions drastically, to increase safety and to save cost. So I'm now happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just browsing through the chat here. I'm not seeing any questions that pop up right now at the moment.
Given the time, Nicole, perhaps we could move on to our next speaker and bring the questions all for the end then.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Johannes, for your presentation this afternoon. So our final speaker today wants to transform aviation through airships. He is an entrepreneur in aviation and lighter than air technology, introducing sustainable skies through hybrid airships. He has a mission to enable aeronauts to have access and to experience the most remote and pristine regions in style and comfort without leaving a carbon footprint. I'm pleased to welcome the CEO and president of OceanSky Aviation, Carl Oskar Lawaczeck. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So
my name is Carl Oskar Lawaczeck. I'm the CEO of OceanSky Cruises, founded in Sweden in 2014. The OceanSky project was initiated to contribute in commercializing large-scale airships. That's the reason we founded the company. The founders come from building and developing and operating airlines, mostly from entrepreneurial angles. I myself, I'm a commercial pilot with a background in economics, in logistics and transportation systems from Gothenburg University in Sweden. So in 2 words, our company is basically focused on one thing, generating demand for airship services. We want to contribute in building an airship industry, not just one airship, not 10 airships, but hundreds, or maybe even, if we can dream, thousands of large-scale airships. We believe in this technology, but in order to build an industry, there has to be a few things in place. So one, it has to be, there must be a reason for existence of that industry. The why should we build an industry of airships? The two is a strategy. It must be a strategy, a roadmap or plan to reach that goal, a feasible one. And then 3 is a very, sometimes very overlooked, I think, personally. It's a successful launch. Successful launch is everything is hinged on the entry point of a new technology. A failed beginning means an uphill battle and a risk of a very slow progress. And we can't afford to fail. But how do we define success? So what is success? In success, we include, there must be an engineering success. The airship must be proficient. There must be an operational success. That means that we cannot have any accidents. We must have proficient operations. We need to understand how to efficiently maneuver an airship, both in the air and on the ground. And there must be a commercial success. And this is where we are trying to contribute on the commercial success, because just because you build an airship doesn't mean that everything goes well from there and we will build hundreds or thousands of airships. There must be profitability for airships in early stages, in our belief. All these 3 parts have to come together for what we think revival of airship into commercial skies to happen. So let's start with the why. Why should we have airship darkening the skies? Well, the why is, it's a big why. As Johannes was explaining before, airships have a lower energy footprint, and this is really, really key, because let's take a step back and do some first principle thinking. What is the climate crisis? What is a climate crisis? The climate crisis is really nothing else but an energy crisis, or better said, a clean energy crisis. We don't have enough clean or renewable energy to supply for all our activities on Earth. That's why we're having this crisis. This is a problem, as you probably already know. We use fossil fuels to cover the gap of clean energy supplies. We're borrowing from the future by sucking up the stored energy from the ground, because we don't have the infrastructure to harvest the energy that the world needs today. In fact, 75% of the world's energy production or consumption, which is in balance, it's the same basically, must be sourced from fossil fuels. 75%. So if we want to live off of what we harvest in energy, which is living sustainably, we have 2 choices. Either we can increase the renewable energy production, and that we have to do with infrastructure, or that will take decades. It has already started, but it will take a long time to put all that infrastructure in place. Or we can reduce our consumption of energy, our total consumption as a world. If we reduce the overall consumption, we reduce fossil fuel consumption automatically, because the last kilowatt hour is always produced by fossil fuels. We don't turn off the hydropower just because the world is using less energy. No, we stop the electrical generators run off of diesel before we close the hydropower plant. So let's imagine a future with only renewable energy production. This is what most of the world wants. And with sustainability on the agenda today of every government, like all corporations with significance and most individuals, this is already gaining speed. And imagining the end result is quite relevant, because every large shift in society happens in incremental stages, right? And it's interesting to look at the shift when it is played out. Without fossil fuels, there'll be a scarcity of energy for a long time. I mean, we're talking about removing 75% of the world's energy production, the 75% of the supply, contemplating that we would succeed with phasing out fossil fuels. And this means there will be a scarcity of energy, and scarcity drives up price. Energy will become increasingly expensive if we continue on this agenda. The only way to save this planet, though, is by using less energy. So we have to basically share this energy supplies, share a smaller cake. In the transportation sectors, the winners are those technologies that require less energy, since they can operate cheaper. And losers are the high energy consuming vehicles, for example, passenger ferries, helicopters, airplanes. There's lots of them. And this picture actually tells what Johannes said in his speech, that in one single picture, that this is the Macon. It flew in the 1930s and used about 4% of a Boeing 747 jumbo jet. But if we could build the Macon today, chances are that it could carry the same amount of passengers, because we can build things so much lighter and with so much more potential. And aviation's challenge, aviation is actually the most challenging of all industries to make sustainable, because just simply because of the law of physics. It requires energy to lift weight upwards, with one exception, lighter than air technology. And I think this challenge lays a foundation to something much greater than the lighter than air technology itself. I think that airships can become a symbol, a messenger of humanity's transition to sustainable activities on Earth. If we can fix aviation, we can basically fix anything. In the past, airships were successfully used as propaganda tools. This wasn't a bad idea in itself, although the message at the time in the 30s were quite controversial. But airships are clean, they're quiet, non-intrusive, despite their majestic size. Airships are slow, but resilient trends in the travel industry, we're talking about passenger travel, is to connect with yourself and the real values in life, where time optimization is viewed in a different light. It's where being present and enjoying the experience of family, friends, or colleagues in quality ways are increasing in importance. And airships are spacious, and one of the core pillars of luxury is comfort. In order to have comfort, you must have space. Space increases our standard of living. These attributes forms a powerful message, and we note that the narrative is crucial to succeed with the revival of airships. Building the sensation of airships is a task not to be considered lightly. History is a pillar in the narrative of airships. And it's an untold story with fantastic achievements in early days of when mankind learned how to fly after centuries of dreaming about it, really after centuries. And the connection with the challenges of our time and the challenges of the past builds a bridge with our heritage and our culture and where we come from. The challenges of the past were exploration and national pride and boasting achievements. Today, those challenges, the challenges of our generation, is sustainability. And then hope with a clear story of how airships can be the answer to one of the most difficult industries to decarbonize, will send a message to all other industries there are no excuses to not find a better way to operate. But again, the narrative here is core in our perspective, in our perception. Abraham Lincoln was an intelligent man. He even ended up on the dollar bill, so he must have done something right. He said, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail, nothing. But without it, nothing can succeed. So if the narrative is successful, the industry will be successful automatically. We've seen throughout time and history in aviation, we've seen numerous engineering marvels, fantastic flying vehicles, machines that awed us. But only a few of these machines have made commercial success. And this is the message of my talk today with you guys, is that the use case and the commercial aspects are often overlooked by engineering-driven companies. It's somebody else's problem, right? I make them fly, I'm an engineer, somebody else makes them profitable. Well, it's a little bit too late. The formula for a successful machine is far from an output of compartmentalized processes with I make them fly and then you make them profitable. Without collaboration, the story usually stops at prototype level. It's not easy to build an engineering marvel, and it's even harder to make an engineering marvel a success in commercialization. Two challenges in one, and then you have to operate it flawlessly too. In the picture you have Concorde and the Consortium from Russia, famously called the Tupolev 144. Concorde was never a commercial success. It flew for many years, but it was only British Airways and Air France that had the governments paying for the development of these great engineering marvels. But they never made any money, and they couldn't sell it to any other company. Singapore Airlines tried, wet leased it for a couple of weeks, I think only. But then they stopped operation because it was just too expensive. The Tupolev 144 was even a worse commercial failure. The Hughes H4 Hercules on the right there of Howard Hughes was didn't ever make it to commercial uptake. The Dornier X was not a commercial success either. The Antonov 225 is an amazing airplane. It's a marvel of our times, but I think they built one or two. And then we have the Caproni, which even looking at the picture can tell you that it wasn't a commercial success. But it happens over and over in history that the aviation produces engineering marvels, and I would be so unhappy if that would happen to airships, because humanity really needs to build a lot of airships, and therefore we have to succeed in making them an engineering success, an operational success, but also a commercial success. So now you ask me, how do you do that? Well, how to make airships commercially successful. And of course, our view in OceanSky, the key is not in its ability to land everywhere. It's fantastic if they can, but it's not the key, nor is it the low footprint or the beauty of the giant beast that soars the sky. The key is to maximize the competitive advantage of airships, and that's space. Nothing else in the world of flying machines has a capability to offer as much space as an airship can do. Space means comfort, and I mean this for both passengers and cargo. I'll get to the cargo part, but the passenger is obvious. Space equals comfort. Comfort equals luxury. Luxury sells. Sales drive revenue, obviously. Revenue generates profits. Profits builds industries. There's nothing else than profits that can build an industry. That's why we need to generate profits from the start, in our beliefs. There's other ways to do it, other strategies. In this case, with airships, with these massive investments of billions of dollars, I think that we need to show profits at an early stage in order to scale up the industry. In the picture here is comparison to an airplane, where the alternative cost is space limited, or the alternative cost is space in an aircraft. The alternative cost in an airship is, although, weight. And this is super important to understand if you're an economist and you want to calculate business cases for airships. So once we can show the excellence of lighter than air technology, we can start talking about this massive issue that you see here, the carbon dioxide emission from aviation. We're reaching 1 billion tons. That's 1,000 million tons per year in the atmosphere, and not just in the atmosphere, very high up in the atmosphere, which creates another problem, that the contribution to global warming proportional to the carbon dioxide is somewhere around 1.9 to 4.7, according to the IPCC. We don't know, or the researchers don't know exactly what the contribution is, but it's not much less than 2, definitely. So if we look at the CO2 emissions from aviation times 1.9, very conservative calculation here, we see that it will reach almost 5,000 million tons of carbon dioxide. This is becoming a huge issue for the industry, but also for the inhabitants of the planet. Let's just consider, if you would allow me to dream a little bit. I'm not crazy. I'm just like to dream for 2 minutes. What if we could, in 2025, 2026, something like this, start flying airships, show that the technology works, lowering the unit costs in order to break into new and better markets, and start producing airships on a serial production after 2025. We can start with producing tens, and we're coming up come up to maybe 100 a year soon, and we can break into the cargo markets. We can break into the passenger travel markets. There'll be a train in the sky, and so on. We can show that there will be a massive decrease of carbon emission from this airship switching an airplane to an airship, one by one, which is far better than any other projections can show. Whether you tweak engines of airplanes, jet engines, save fuel, save weight, battery-driven airplanes, hydrogen-driven airplanes. I mean, now we're talking massive energy savings in the transportation system in the air. But okay, how do we get here? If this was our ambition, and I argued that it should be our ambition, we should aim high. We should change as many airplanes into airships as is possible. How would we get there? Well, by lowering, this is our truth, by lowering unit costs in every development cycle. It's all about unit costs, because mass market adoption doesn't happen without comparable or lower unit costs or a much better service, combination of those two. But it needs engineering innovation, but it also needs business model innovation in every development cycle of airships. And not going into this complicated, it's just to show that we are starting off from the left here, and we're starting off at very high unit cost. The airship manufacturers won't agree with me on this, but every technology is expensive in the beginning. It's very hard to get around that. And the unit costs are driven by research and development costs and financial risk in the beginning. That's what's driving the high unit cost. Later stages is driven by operational and manufacturing costs. And there's immense opportunities in those two things, manufacturing and operational, when it comes to lowering unit costs for airships in comparison to heavier than air technology that flies 200 kilometers an hour when landing, and flying at 10,000 meters with pressurized cabins, complicated landing gear systems and everything. This requires maintenance, and it requires manufacturing, complex manufacturing processes, and this drives costs. So airships have a real advantage there because they're simple and they're slow. We have to make these sustainable alternatives, such as lighter than air technology, become more affordable in order to reach tipping points where markets rather choose a sustainable product rather than an unsustainable product, not because of sustainability. That's a niche market, people that buys product because they're sustainable. That's 3% of the population. But we have to reach a unit cost where this happens because of the price, because of it's cheaper to send a package with an airship or go as a passenger with an airship. That's when mass adoption occurs, of course. But we have to ignite this industry with these high unit costs in the beginning. That's our firm belief. And igniting an industry of this scale is not an easy task. Scaling it from a niche product to mass market segments involves building the markets from zero. Nobody knows an airship delivery service. This requires endurance, strategy, and collaboration. And to succeed, we believe profits from the start are essential, as I mentioned before. Innovation in technology is not enough. We also need innovation in the business model, like I also said before. From luxury travel, that is a high margin product and a high revenue product, and can potentially offset these financial risks and these R&D risks. We can then go into special segments of aviation cargo. And I mean special segments. I don't think we can compete with FedEx or DHL anytime soon. They have extremely low kilogram costs. And these are systems that has been running for 30, 40 years and fine-tune the machinery. So it's very, very hard to go into a market and think that you will be able to compete with an airship in early development stages. But the future is there because of those reasons I mentioned. The operational and the manufacturing costs that drives the unit costs are very low for airships. It's the R&D and the financial cost, which is related to the risk. That's the drivers of the high unit costs in the beginning. but that's passing that's something that decreases with operational proficiency. When unit cost decreases to the point when we can enter passenger travel market, that's where it's really, really interesting. Then we have a mass market adoption, in my firm belief. And passenger travel, I'm just going to make a little pass at passenger travel. I know that people say airships are slow and they're concerned about this for passenger travel. I think it's completely wrong to be wrong. It's not necessary to be concerned about this, because airships is a different product. If you want to go to somewhere in Europe from Stockholm, which is Northern Europe, and you want to go to Southern Europe, you'll have to get up in the morning very, very early to catch the first flight to Southern Europe if you want to get there any time before noon. So when thinking about airships, you have to think about how the life on board is on that travel. If you get on an airship in the evening instead and have 14 hours to travel to the Southern Europe, isn't that a better product? For me, I would choose that any day, not because I'm an airship geek, but because it's a better product. You sleep on the airship, you get your own cabin, and back to what I said before, it's key to give space. Instead of time, we can give space, because space is a luxury pillar. If you give space, you can then sleep, you can work, you can eat, you can do something else, you can hang in the bar. And this gives value where the essence of time changes, this perspective of time changes. But anyways, in order to fulfill all these requirements that constitute the beginning of a success story, landing on ground zero for climate change, the North Pole makes the best beginning for the revival of airships, in our opinion. In the physical edition of this airship symposium, expected to take place in Canada in October, if I understand it correctly, we'd love to tell you more about this expedition of a lifetime. Now, this was just a teaser or an explanation of the logic behind why we should go to the North Pole, and why and why on all places on Earth we chose the North Pole. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Nicole and Johannes and Oscar, Carl Oscar. I'm sorry that we aren't going to have time for direct questions, because we are going to run out. Like Cinderella, our coach is going to turn into a pumpkin pretty soon. And I want to make some opportunity for Dr. Gerard to make a few comments of what he's heard over the day. He was here 20 years ago. He heard a similar amount of talks. So Dr. Gerard, over to you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Barry. And it's actually very exciting to see how far things have come in 20 years. There's still obviously some way to go in the development, but I think that there's some really exciting opportunities. Congratulations to you, Barry, for assembling people, presenters and listeners from all over the world. Sweden, Germany, Finland, Italy, France, Belgium, Denmark, Nigeria, Dubai, all over Canada, the United States. I think this is a wonderful opportunity, people getting together and fostering what has been emphasized many times over, the importance of collaboration in this effort. I think the need for airships was amply demonstrated by many of the presenters, from Katrina, Nokleby, Norman, the Arctic, the potential, the need, Madeleine, Redfern, it really is essential that we get moving on this if we're going to be able to provide goods and services to the Arctic the way we should be able to. The way we're doing it right now is really not sustainable. I was very interested in Christine Burrow's talk on mining. It's interesting that if you look at Manitoba, the development of the road system initially was based on where the mines were. It was only later that we started building roads elsewhere. And mines create a need for transportation that is sustained and dramatic and essential. It's interesting, there's a little known fact that in the early 1930s, the busiest airport in the world was not a place like Chicago. It was a little community in northwestern Ontario where people were ferrying goods, equipment, and mineral products back and forth to Red Lake, Ontario. And it was mining which was critically important in the development of aircraft and the commercial opportunities for those aircraft very early on. And I think that the opportunities for Torngat and in the Labrador and northern Quebec are amazing, and that the potential there is to get a start on using airships commercially, and once there is a start on using airships commercially, I think there will be no stopping the ongoing use and development and the many opportunities. Carl Oscar Lawaczeck talked about the potential in passenger aircraft and all sorts of things. It will take a while for passenger aircraft to be certified. I mean, certainly initially it's going to be the cargo opportunities, which are probably the most critical to get things off the ground, to show that these airships can be used effectively and safely. I was impressed by a number of presenters, and particularly Johannes, talking about the greenness of the aircraft and the need that we will have to have airships, quite frankly, because of the need to address climate change. Carl Oscar Lawaczeck also talked in great detail about this. It's an exciting time. There's a big opportunity. Part of that opportunity, I think, will need the collaboration of many, and getting people together in a venue like this is an important part of setting things up so that those collaborations can develop. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you to the panelists for wonderful, wonderful presentations and very exciting future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gerard, and thank you everyone who participated and attended. Don't forget, tomorrow we're going to hear about the supply of airships. Today we heard about the demand for airships. Tomorrow we're going to hear from some of the developers, the regulations, and the future for drones as well. So thank you very much for attending today. I won't keep you longer because we promised to keep this short, as I know some people, even those watching in India, are probably pretty late at night right now. So thank you everyone from around the world who is watching as well. And we'll close the session now and look forward to seeing as many of you as can make it tomorrow to the supply of airships. And with that, thank you very much and bye for now.